Hello and welcome to this episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today I have Natasha Hoy with me. Thank you for joining us, Natasha.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's been a great day. Looking forward to the release of Star Wars Jedi Survivor this week.
Yes, so that's obviously one of the things I want to talk to you about. So you're currently working at Respawn. What do you do there?
Yeah, I'm a visual effects artist at Respawn on the Jedi team, Star Wars Jedi team.
Okay, and what does that involve, specifically as a VFX artist?
Yeah, so VFX art is like it encompasses like fire, water, smoke, like particle effects, like ambient things in the sky, sometimes even like bugs and creatures and that sort of thing. I usually say like basically it encompasses anything that moves that isn't a character or like a major prop, are things that like VFX artists like touch.
Okay, and on Jedi Survivor, how many VFX artists, are there generally on a game like that? Because that's a pretty
Yeah.
top tier game.
Of course, yeah. So in-house, within Respawn's Jedi team, I believe we have about eight of us within Respawn, and then we also have like outsource studios that help us as well from other VFX houses, and that's quite a bit more. I want to say it might even be like 20 or so outsourced VFX artists that are also helping us as well. So yeah, just a
Okay,
lot.
yeah. So those outsourced ones, are they there, generally throughout the whole process, just as a contractor instead? Or is it just, if and when they need them, so they just ramp up, and get a few more, but then they slow down when things are, just ticking by nicely with just the permanent ones from the team?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the studio and the production of the current game. So they're kind of contracted for a certain amount of time, and I believe that they can like re-sign like the contract for that particular like VFX studio if they need them for longer. So, but yeah, it's usually just for like a like set amount of time for the most part, based on the
Okay.
needs of the project and the team.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Jedi Survivor is using Unreal Engine 4, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So why not Unreal Engine 5? Because obviously I understand UE4 for something like Jedi Fallen Order, perhaps. But why for Jedi Survivor, which UE5 has been out for a while now?
Yeah. So if I remember correctly with the timing of everything, I believe that the production for Survivor started before Unreal Engine 5
Hmm.
had like fully like kicked off. So that's one big reason. And another thing too, like when an engine is like newer, just like came out like Unreal Engine 5, like they still kind of like got to work out like the kinks and everything. And sometimes there could be like stability issues and that sort of thing. So switching over from a different engine can also be it can affect a lot of things. It can break a lot of things. So usually like when a studio is already like working on something with a particular engine, they don't switch over in the middle of the project because they would have to like change a lot of things, or a lot of things might not no longer be like available. There might be tools, for example, that we might have used or created for Unreal Engine 4, and
Yeah.
then we switch over to 5, and that means like we'd have to either rebuild those tools or kind of work around it. So kind of like it takes up time switching over to a different game engine. That's not to say that like in the future, like if there was like future games that like Unreal Engine 5 wouldn't be used. But that's kind of just how it worked out for this current game. It's a little bit more stable too. Unreal Engine 4
Yeah.
is right now, so
Okay, fair enough. And
yeah.
has there been any tests or anything done in UE5 in any capacity by the Jedi Survivor team? Just checking it out, see what can be done potentially.
I don't think there's any like anything official on anyone's end. I'm sure like there's probably like on an individual basis some people might be like kind of like messing around with Unreal Engine 5, but I think like we were like pretty focused on like getting this game out the door. So like yeah, the focus is on Unreal Engine 4 for now. But yeah, I'm sure there's definitely people that might have messed around a little bit in Unreal Engine 5. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So what was the interview process like for Respawn?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a unique interview process since I didn't apply to a position at Respawn. A Respawn recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn about working as a VFX artist at Respawn. This was while I was still at Naughty Dog. If I remember correctly, too, there wasn't even like a job posting posted publicly. They were kind of like hand picking people or reaching out to people. So the initial process, like I spoke with the recruiter through a Zoom call, which went well. So then it kind of moved forward in the process. And in most cases, there's usually like an art test that you do just to make sure that you pass like the quality bar, like you can like do the work that they're looking for. But around the timing of it was when I was like close to like wrapping up The Last of Us Part One. So I kind of explained that to them, and also like because I was working at Naughty Dog, like, I kind of already met like a bar of standards, like already working there and working on The Last of Us. So I was kind of able to like get away with not having to do an art test. And then after that point, I had some interviews with the team. I interviewed with um, the head producer, one of the head producers, and like environment artist, tech artist, kind of a little bit of variety. I think there was like 5 people for per the 2 interviews that I did. And then also I did an interview with like some VFX and destruction people. Respawn Jedi team kind of clumps together the VFX and destruction folks, so we're kind of like all under VFX. So yeah, that was what my process was like, and yeah.
Okay. So, what inspired you in becoming a VFX artist in the first place compared to, because there's so many things that are involved in making a game just from the art standpoint. So, why VFX?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess starting out like as a kid, like I've always loved VFX in film and games, and I didn't even realize this until like later when I was like an adult and also like working in the industry. Like a lot of my favorite movies growing up were very VFX heavy. Like I loved like Pirates of the Caribbean, like Transformers, all those superhero movies, Harry Potter. So yeah, and even as a kid, I used to imagine I had like superpowers to like control water, fire, lightning, and stuff. I kind of had like a weird obsession with that, and even like colors, and I'd even like sometimes I'd like just like blow stuff up in the microwave just to see how it looked because I thought it was cool. Like I've always had a kind of a fixation for those kinds of things. And I also love VFX for being both like technical and artistic. It scratches both those aspects of me, the scientist and artist. I initially started off as a generalized tech artist. While I was in school, tech artists are both kind of on the fence of both being technical and artistic, of course, hence the name. But tech art kind of leaned a little bit more heavy into the technical side, so there's less like of producing art assets and more so like producing tools to help artists. But VFX kind of encompasses both those sides while also like being leaning a little bit more towards like art because you're actually making art. So yeah, and I think it's like one of the few areas too where it encompasses so many different areas of art in general too. Like as a VFX artist, like you have to understand like timing and movement, and those are kind of like similar to animation principles. Sometimes you might have to like make a creature or like a bug, and you might have to model that and texture it, and then turn it into a particle effect. So that encompasses like modeling, which is obviously from a different art area. So I just love it for being able to encompass like everything. And VFX also just I don't know, it just like seeing a good VFX effect like makes me feel a lot of emotions too. So it's like I'm very passionate about it. So
Oh yeah, for
I've always
sure.
been.
When you, especially in more, modern games in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years where, the character models are getting better, the textures are getting better, it's like the next step. How can we enhance, the game more? Physics is obviously one, visual effects, is another. Having all these little extra particles, these little bit of extra effects that just make the world or, what you're doing feel that little bit more, realistic. So,
Absolutely.
so at what stage of the development process of a game in general would a VFX artist, come about, and how, are they introduced? Are they communicating with the coders, the other designers? What's the process?
Yeah, so VFX art kind of falls under downstream art. So VFX kind of goes in hand with like lighting and audio. I tend to be like really close to lighting and audio people in places I worked at just because like we tend to be at the like further down the pipeline, so we end up kind of talking a lot and getting close to each other. So usually, the designers kind of they need to do like the brainstorming and then the initial block out process. Like the basic building blocks of the game, which are usually just like cubes. And then an environment artist goes in and then they start doing like the asset creation, and then as I guess further down the pipeline, then like VFX start to like come into play a little bit more. There definitely can be like VFX like early on in production, like especially like when we're testing out like certain ideas or like I feel like VFX does really lend itself to game design because it's like really important to like be able to show to the describing the players like a way that makes sense based on the design of something. So, for example, like if the designers wanted like a healing effect, then like the VFX artists really need to like make sure it makes sense to the players visually. Like that it the players actually healing or like what the attack's supposed to be like, if it's an area effect, that sort of thing. And then of course there's ambient effects, which are could be like leaves or like water drips and that sort of thing. But yeah, usually VFX tends to be like further down into the pipeline, and our work can really be affected by the people like working in the pipeline before us, like more upstream. So of course, like for example, like if there was a bridge that like fell down and we needed dust for that, like if suddenly like the bridge prop itself like changed or it was like placed differently or whatever, like that sort of thing will affect VFX artists. So yeah, kind of just like adding the extra juice to the game. But I think it adds one thing I love about it too is like it adds life to the game. It adds life and movement. So
Yeah, it definitely
yeah.
makes it. When you see some good visual, effects, whether it's in a game, whether it's a movie. In movies, I'd say it's it, not that it's not important. It's you see so many movies that just are on point with the CGI, with the visual effects, everything, and it's almost more. It's harder to kind of do the story aspect of it better than it is to do the CGI and the that side of it compared to in games. That I feel like there's still a lot more that can be done on that side of it to
Mhm.
give the story, the characters, and the world, depth and life.
Yes.
Like you were saying, the example that you gave, when you see, like a bridge collapse, and you see, some dust particles coming out, and then maybe, some part of the bridge bending, and then as a result, extra, effects, or if it's interacting with the rest of the game world. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things when you see a good visual effect, you definitely remember it because there's
Absolutely.
been definitely times when I've played games and I'm like, that just looks, really, really good. So would like in Star Wars Jedi Survivor and also in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, when you have your lightsaber, especially if you hold it up in like the block position and you're near a wall, it shines, the light of the lightsaber onto the wall. Would that be considered a visual effect, or is that more in the lighting realm, or is it kind of in between?
Yeah, I think there's some crossover. I will say for Survivor, I didn't handle the lightsaber myself, so I can't
Hmm.
speak on that. I think that we kept the same technology from the first game, Jedi Fallen Order. I think that some of it fell onto technical art as well. I think it kind of just depended. But yeah, it's definitely a mixture of both. I would say like probably leans a little more towards VFX, but I think we weren't like solely in charge of that since we already had the technology for it. So we were just, if there was issues, then it would kind of sometimes fall over onto the technical artist side of stuff. But yeah, I can't go into super much depth in the lightsaber since I hadn't done much work on it itself. Like the technology was already built. But yeah, I mean, for most things, a lot of things just kind of most like props or most assets, they kind of fall into the lap of a lot of different people working on it.
Yeah.
And the lightsaber, has like technical aspects to it that needed to be handled by technical art, for example, or even like maybe even design. So
Okay. So
Yeah.
what sort of, tools and software does a VFX artist, utilize, and what specific one did you and the team utilize at, on Jedi Survivor?
Yeah. So I think it's also like it also depends to which like realm of VFX you're working on. That's usually how I kind of like describe it, the different like VFX categories is like realism, which is like most like lifelike. So I would games like that are like Naughty Dog, and then there's also stylized which are games more like World of Warcraft and like League of Legends, and the workflows for those can vary a lot too, and like if you take a VFX artist from Warcraft like that or League of Legends, like that kind of methodology and everything and thought process for how to create those VFX can differ a lot from like a VFX artist at Naughty Dog, and sometimes it almost feels like it could be like a different like almost discipline because of how different it can be. But generally speaking, especially if you're starting out in VFX, it's like really important to understand how to make a particle effect within the game engine. Granted, not every studio has a game engine where you can make like particle effects within it, but generally speaking, starting out, it's important to know like have some understanding of like Unity and Unreal Engine, either like one or the other or both, just like making particle effects within that engine, and then also making textures as well, which like provides the colors and kind of like the movement of the VFX particle effects itself. So you might be looking at making stuff in like Photoshop, um, even I know I've heard of some people that use Adobe After Effects as well, sometimes even Substance Designer. And then if you wanted to make like fluid or fire simulations, you might use something like Houdini or Embergen. And it's really up to the VFX artist too to like kind of decide like what they want to do for their workflow. So there's usually not like super hard rules per studio on what people use. But I will say, like someplace like Naughty Dog, there is a lot of proprietary tools there. So yeah, the workflow is just a little bit is gonna vary a lot from place to place and studio to studio and VFX artist to VFX artist. Naughty Dog, their proprietary like VFX tools. A lot of it, Naughty Dog's like very technical, so there was like a lot of like scripting and programming needed to even like make the effects there. Versus, of course, like at Respawn, like using Unreal Engine, which scripting isn't necessary for VFX. So
Okay, I mean, why would you say that is, the case at Naughty Dog compared to Respawn with, let's say Jedi Survivor? Because Respawn, no small studio, obviously not
mhm.
as old as Naughty Dog, but again, it's still making top tier, titles. It's not like it's making some small 2D game where they
For
can
sure.
get away with something off the shelf. So, like, like, why would you say that Naughty Dog has gone down that route?
Yeah, so like for studios that have been around a long time and have been very established, a lot of them have their own like in-house proprietary game engines that they've made like on their own. Because like the free engines like back in the day, probably like weren't up to par with like what they needed for the games, and there's benefits and cons to both the routes of having a proprietary engine versus using something like Unreal Engine. Like for example, like at Naughty Dog, because they made an engine for their games, they're able to kind of tailor the whole engine around like what they need to make. Of course, like Naughty Dog really pushes like realism, right? So like that's what a lot of the tools were based around. And with an engine, a proprietary engine being around for a long time at a studio, like they've built up like years and years of in-house tools for their studio and for their games. So it's you don't see like studios like switching over too much with like outside of their proprietary engine because they'd kind of be like throwing away like years of work. And I know even like speaking like on some people that I know like that are in the industry working on games that have been around a really long time, like some stuff is like hard coded, like years hard coded into like their engine, and they can't even like adjust it or change it or that sort of thing. So like like something like League of Legends, like there's only like which it's there's pros and cons to that, of course, right? Like you have to like work around that, but it's also like it allows like the game to like be like really stable, or it caters to the needs of the studio. So
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. one of those things that like you were saying, because I've been exposed to the gaming industry. I know a ton of people in the gaming industry, and like you're saying, the older studios, the more established ones, they definitely have their own tools, their own game engines. Sometimes those game engines start off as game engines they can get, and then they modify them. In the case of Valve, it was what the Quake engine that they actually, a lot of the game studios today, a lot of the big ones, the many of them have some sort of modified or built on top of version of like the Quake engine, and from there they have their own engine, and that's what they use for their titles now. Plus, because they can specialize it for their particular
Exactly.
titles, the way things are. Because don't get me wrong, Unreal is a fantastic engine, but when and I'd say this is the case with any engine, to be fair, but when I play a game, and because there's so many games made with Unreal, I play and I think that kind of feels unreally. It feels like it's an Unreal Engine game, and
Hmm.
you can
Yeah.
tell the ones that have put more effort into it and have tried to make it not feel like a generic Unreal template, but it still
Yeah.
has and even like the way the textures and the way the lighting's done, it has a certain feel to it. So if you're looking for something different, it's like you'll see these demos where they'll be like GTA 5 or GTA 3 remade in Unreal, and obviously that's only a tech demo, and they look good, but you can tell they're made in Unreal. It doesn't
Exactly.
look like a new game, it looks like an Unreal game.
Yeah, yeah. And like I can tell too. I'm like I see you like I'm like I know that's Unreal Water. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean that's the benefit of having like a proprietary engine is like they can build it based off of their own needs. But there's also pros of Unreal Engine because it looks good out of the box, and you don't necessarily need to do a whole lot of like building upon it. If you don't want to, you don't have time or resources. So yeah, it really just depends. And I think yeah, Jedi Fallen Order. I think yeah, they started off Unreal Engine because I think that was the first time Respawn used Unreal Engine too, and they were just like I think they started prototyping it in it first, and they were just like oh yeah, like let's just like keep like working off of this, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, like I do believe too, like that, um, like the game engine, like it is important, but at the end of the day, I think it's like always like down to like the team and like what you do with it versus then like just like the tool itself, right? So yeah, so that's that's always like my response to with like Unreal Engine 4 versus Unreal Engine 5. Um, like argument, I guess, like because people are like, oh, like why not use Unreal Engine 5? And it's like, yeah, like Unreal Engine 5 is great, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to like the team. Like if the team's talented, then the game's gonna look good, like regardless of what engine they're working with, right? Um, so yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's my two cents on.
yeah, for sure. Like if the team gets the most out of the engine,
Mhm.
the latest version isn't always necessary. And obviously future titles they can go on to the newer version of Unreal, because
Of
like
course.
you're saying, it'll be more stable. There'll be more resources available as well, be more tried and tested. And that's also another advantage of just generally using an off the shelf engine like Unreal and maybe doing some modifications versus using your own engine, is that you can go on YouTube and you can get Unreal tutorials. You're not going to do
Absolutely.
that for Naughty Dog's engine.
Yeah, yeah.
Rockstar's engine. They are
Right.
the only people who can help you. And if one of the people that was pretty instrumental in making a specific feature in that internal engine leaves or
Hmm.
maybe passes away, like what do you do? What do you do then? Whereas with these other ones,
Exactly.
you probably can find somebody that's done something like you're trying to do on a forum or on YouTube, but you can't do that with Naughty Dog's engine. So there's that disadvantage.
Absolutely. And I definitely felt that working at both studios as well. Like there's definitely times well, Naughty Dog was my first studio I worked at outside of school and I was just like, am I dumb because I'm not like getting some of this stuff right away? But it was like no, it's just cuz it's like esoteric and it's proprietary. So like sometimes like you just have to ask someone like and like they'll just have to tell you because it's sometimes stuff is super obscure and again like you said you can't look stuff up. So yeah, that was like one of the perks too of like going to Respawn and Unreal Engine, like having so many resources for sure.
Yeah.
But another thing too with like game engines, it also depends too if the studio has a lot of like technical support, like if they have like a lot of graphics programmers to like help build upon the engine, that also makes a difference. One thing about graphics programmers is that like if they're really good, a lot of them like to work in like tech, like the tech industry versus video games. Like the graphics programmers that work in video games are in it. Well, you know, same with developers, I guess too. They're in it because they're passionate about games because they would make a lot more money like working at like like Unity or like Facebook
Yes,
or
of course.
wherever, so that's another like limitation too to like whether the studio does have the graphics programmers or technical people to improve upon their game engines.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the problems with the gaming industry is that, especially for the programmers, the pay is not, like as you said, not as good as
Right.
if they went to traditional tech
Yes.
and startup. Like if you go to like a well-funded tech startup or a tech startups that is now a giant like Google, for example, their pay is going to far outweigh the pay that you'll get at a video game company, plus your workload and your work life balance will probably be better as well, because in reality you're not having this tight deadline of this is the date the game's coming out, this is the date we got to show it off at E3 or whatever. It needs to be amazing, and obviously you're part of a team that is very crucial in showing it off initially. So that part of it is definitely, like you say, you got to be passionate to be in that industry. Is that the case with VFX artists and artists in general? Can you get paid more if you go to the movie route, for example, or maybe some other industry, or is it pretty similar?
Yeah, so I guess one thing about like programming industry too, at least from the programs I've talked to in the game industry, they said like usually they don't have too much crunch on their ends, which has been nice. At least the people I've talked to, like Naughty Dog and Respawn. So that's one little like anecdote. But of course, yeah, like they need to be passionate about it, otherwise they'd like go someplace that pays more. But in terms of VFX, from what I understand, I guess the most like closest thing to the VFX in games is like in film or film animation. I would say like the pay from what I know is like they're pretty similar. I think I've heard from film like like real like live action film, they might even like there is issues with pay sometimes, just because of like how the film industry handles like VFX houses and that sort of thing. Like so the process for like a VFX studio working on a film, from what I've been told, is that like films would be like they'll set out like a thing like, hey, like we need like a VFX studio to like work on VFX for our film, and then the VFX studios will give them like a number of like how much money they need to be paid to work on the film. So they have this bidding process, and it's usually like they try to take like the lowest like bidder, like whoever like is asking for the least amount of money. So that kind of leads its way to like VFX studios maybe like not getting enough money for like their staff or like resource, or sometimes like VFX studios like they can go bankrupt like pretty like quickly or easily. Like the studio that worked on Life of Pi, and the studio that worked on Sonic, like when they originally had a I think it's wait, yeah, Tiger and Life of Pi, and then they were asked to change it, and that studio they ended up going bankrupt because they had to change it and they didn't have the resource to do it. Of course, they won an Oscar after the fact, but stuff like that happens. Same with the Sonic studio that made the Sonic movie. They also went bankrupt after they were asked to change. Um, how Sonic looked, which is well, I'm sure we're all glad that we like Sonic ended up looking better, but it's also kind of sad that had to happen. But from what I've heard, like there's like instability within like VFX in film studios. It's also important to differentiate too. Like VFX as a term in film tends to encompass like computer graphics, like CGI in general. So we're not just talking about like particles; we're also talking about like like any props that you make in like on the computer, like everything, versus VFX in games like tends to be a very specific tends to denote very specifically like particle effects. So yeah, that's also just a sidebar for that. But
Okay. So, talking about, some of these companies that, go bankrupt, for example, especially in the movie industry, are they like, filing for bankruptcy and then they're, laying off staff and then, restructuring the company? Or are they like literally are companies shutting down and then they're, new ones are setting up in, place of those?
yeah, I mean, for yeah, there's studios that just like get like shut down like entirely, and that's happened a lot over the course of film in general, and that is like one of the issues I've heard with film. I've worked with a lot of people in the game industry that were actually like they worked in film before they worked in games, and so I've heard a lot of stories from film veterans about like stuff like that happening. It can be a lot more unstable environment. Of course, I've never worked in film, and I'm not trying to bash film. Like I love film and like film VFX, so just putting that aside. But that's just from what I've heard is that games tend to be more stable. And working in the film industry, there it's usually like constant contract work. So like you keep getting contracts for like say like 13 weeks at a time, and like obviously you're not really like necessarily getting benefits because you're not working full time, but they only have contracts, so you just have to keep getting contracts, and then within that time period it's like constant crunch, because you have to make a ton of work to make it into the film. And the culture can be more I don't know, cutthroat in a sense too, like that it may be a little bit more individualistic in terms of like people like really wanting to get their work shown, so there might be like a little bit less like people like working together very smoothly in like some games, like in some most of the game studios that I've heard. But yeah, those are the differences I've heard from people working both in film and games, and it's pretty normal for people in film to kind of retire from film and then end up working in games for like benefits and stability and everything else.
Okay, I mean that's definitely interesting because you hear about crunch for developers in the gaming industry,
Mm.
and they get paid better or they have a better experience if they go to general tech, and then to hear that VFX artists are kind of feeling the same thing, but if they're in the movie industry and then they come to the gaming industry to obviously kind of get away from that. I wonder if it's because VFX is more traditionally movie and it's come to games, and development is more traditionally in something like games, and now the development side has gone to other like graphics programmers. You would assume you would first think of a video game company before you would think of a social media company utilizing it. Yeah, Facebook will employ probably more graphics programmers than Respawn does. So I wonder if there's an element of that. It's almost like the original industry that employed them has, I don't know, used them up, or they've pushed them to the brink, and they're just escaping to other industries that are appreciating them maybe a bit more.
Right. Yeah, I think it's kind of a mixture of things, and I think also like money. I think money is a big thing actually, like and how it shaped both of those work environments. So like I was explaining like the work environment for working in like film VFX. Not speaking on film animation studios because that's a little bit different, but like the bidding process, right? Like these studios, like they don't necessarily have like I mean, if you work at a big studio like ILM, like Industrial Light and Magic, you're gonna expect like continually like getting money or funding because people are gonna like keep wanting to work with you. But even then, it's not consistent. Versus like at a game studio, like we can get like continuous like funding to be able to like keep people on full time or benefits and also have people continuous work. Like one thing that a lot of studios do in order to keep like getting like funding is having an like free online game, like Epic with Fortnite or Respawn with Apex, so that like the studio can continuously get money so that they can pay their people, and then we can keep like making other games as well. But if you think about like the film like VFX industry, that doesn't necessarily really happen because they're constantly like they're making VFX for like movies which are like outside of them, right? I think there's like less of an issue with that sort of um like aspect. If you look at like film animation, like if it's like in house, like if it's DreamWorks or Disney, like they're like that's like their own like brainchild, like that's their baby. They're not like going out to like other like film people and like, hey, like we want to bid and like to like be able to like make this or like make VFX for this, right? It's all happening in house, so that also leads to more stability within like film animation. So yeah, that's something that has shaped, I think, both of those cultures. And yeah, and I have seen, speaking to what you were saying before, like film people, they do like end up getting burnt out like from working in film. So yeah, that is why they move into to games.
Okay. So you mentioned Apex Legends and how Respawn, is part of that process of making that game, and these free to play, especially these free to play games like Apex, Fortnite, etc. They make a lot of money off these games. So does is it typical for a company like Respawn to utilize the financial gains of these other products that are usually disproportionate to the amount of input that they're putting into the game versus how much immense money that they're getting from it, to kind of fund and stabilize other projects?
Yeah, I'm not a business person within the industry, but from what I understand, like that's a pretty like common thing for studios to be able to like have a constant stream of income or revenue is for having these free to play games. And like people end up spending a lot of money like playing them or like getting skins and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's not to say that like the input from the dev team is any like less on those games, because if anything, like it might even be like more, because of like short spurts of like, oh, like there's a new season coming out, so like we have to like keep making these like deadlines in like short time spans. Um so yeah, but yeah, that does tend to be like a similar schematic across the industry, where you'll see like that, that will help like the studio with funding, with having a like online game that people can continually kind of like put money into. Um yeah, that's pretty common.
Okay, and because we've talked about video games, we've talked about movies. What are some of your favorite video games and favorite movies? In a general sense, and then also favorite video games and movies from a VFX standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a loaded question. My favorite video game of all time is Dishonored, made by Arcane under ZeniMax, Xbox, Bethesda.
The first
Um,
one,
yeah, under yeah, they're under Bethesda too. Yeah, Dishonored is like one of it's like my favorite games, like aesthetically and like the vibe, the story, like it being an immersive sim. Like there's like nothing like else like Dishonored. And even like VFX wise, it might be leaning towards one of my favorites too, just because of how stylized it is. I love like Dishonored and Arcane for how they have such a strong artistic identity. Like you see an Arcane game and you know it's an Arcane game, and if you play it like play an Arcane game, you know it's an Arcane game too. I feel like they just there's nothing else like that's really like that. And Binding of Isaac is also one of my favorite games. It's obviously not like it's like a 2D like top down type of game. But as a sidebar, it is also one of my favorite games. Final Fantasy makes some really amazing like VFX in my opinion. Like yeah, the Japanese studios, dev studios, I feel like are always like pushing like kind of like how beautiful their VFX are with their technology and everything. It would be really cool like if there was like a Square Enix like in the US, like that would be a really cool place to work. But fortunately, I'm probably not gonna learn Japanese and move to Japan to work at Square Enix. But it would be really awesome. In terms of film, that's a little bit hard. I would say like my favorite like VFX film studio is Industrial Light and Magic. I feel like there's always just something there. They have like a really high bar for quality, and there's like something like different about their VFX as well. One of my favorite movies or like VFX in movies is Pirates of the Caribbean 2. Davy Jones is like the best CGI character of all time in my opinion, and it's just crazy the technology behind it. Like all of Davy Jones' crewmen, like the actors, they just had on like black suits. Like all of that was CGI like created, and it still looks amazing to this day. And I feel like I really love like water as a VFX effect, and I think that like Parts of the Caribbean, at least like the first three are my favorite, have like kind of probably inspired me to like as a VFX artist to like really love water as well. So yeah, that's what I would say like VFX wise in film. Trying to think of recent times. Like Shadow and Bone is one of the shows I've watched recently that has some really cool VFX effects in it. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of generalized. It's kind of difficult sometimes and it can be a little sad too. Like once you like start working in the industry, you become a lot more like aware of how like things are made, which it's like good, but also makes you a lot more like nitpicky about like the things that you see. So your quality standards go up higher. So now like, you know, something I might like think was like an amazing like VFX effect like 5 years ago. Now after working in the industry, I'm like, oh, like that could probably could have been better. Or like I could see what they were doing, but you know, so yeah, that's something that I encounter as well. But yeah, I still get like excited and giddy about like good VFX in general.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's so true. You know what you're saying, that when let's say if it's a programmer, you're a programmer or a VFX artist, when you have been in the industry long enough, you've been around it, you've seen enough titles, you know a lot of the tricks of the trade. So when you see it, like I'll see something, and especially from a programming perspective, I'll be like, okay, that's how they done this, and that's how they done this, and but then it does make you appreciate when somebody does it well, and you see
Yes.
it, and you're like, damn, they pulled that off, with their constraints. Like then you're like, wow, like they definitely know what they're doing. But on the flip side, something that you may have been, like it's okay. Now you're like, yeah, it's not that good because they could, with a bit more effort, have done a better job.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, that's totally true on both ends of it. There's even like stuff that's like probably super subtle that like maybe like gamers that aren't in the industry wouldn't notice, but I'm like, oh, that's like amazing, or like that's like was really hard for them to pull off.
Yeah,
You know, that's it. Kind of like lifts the veil off of like kind of the mystery. Like I think like once you start working in games, like your perspective and your relationship with games sort of changes. And I think initially when I first started working in it, it kind of like I was like it kind of made me sad at first because I was like I'm just like instead of like playing the game, I'm just like analyzing everything or like pointing out where things aren't better or whatever or whatever. So that took some time for me to kind of like get out of that mindset, I guess. But of course, I'm always still analyzing the things I see both in like film and games. And I also like I feel like you can tell too like when you know a team didn't have enough time to work on something, you're like, oh, it's almost there, but you know like I bet like they only had time to do like one pass on it or something. So you can kind of like empathize as well with things.
yeah, you can. But then when it comes out, let's say from a big studio, and you know that they've rushed the release, just to get let's say the game, for example, out there because they know they can do an update. Because I was just recently playing, so I started playing Horizon again because I bought the new one. I think it's Horizon Forbidden West, and I got a few hours into it when it first came out, and I'd got busy with other games and other stuff. Recently got back into it because I replayed Jedi Fallen Order, in time for Jedi Survivor, and I was like, in between, I'll continue with Horizon. And when I was playing it, I was thinking, it looks better than I remember, on the performance mode that I'm playing it because I want the higher frame rate. And because obviously, several months have passed since, me playing it now and since when it came out. And I had read they had done, multiple updates to improve things. So, there's that side of it as well. And unfortunately, when you look at it, you be like, it's just such a shame when you do get a big studio that does rush things a bit.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, that's also been something I've talked about with my friends in the industry as well. Like, where there's this kind of been a trend of like games are like getting bigger and they have like bigger scope and they have more stuff in it. But at the same time, like a lot of times, sometimes they don't feel or like they aren't like completely finished. Like when they get in the hands of players, sometimes to where like you know there needs to be like patches and updates and everything. And I think um I usually like it usually doesn't fall on the developers themselves, but like the people the people like people like in charge of like how long like they're gonna set aside time for like the game to like until it's shipped and that sort of thing. And I think that like yeah, with games getting bigger and more with technology improving too, and like the ability for us to do more with games, like we do need like probably more time to work on the games to make sure that they're like as polished as we want them to be when they come out, and also like for the sake of like players and fans and stuff like that, to like give them like the fully complete like game when it's out. Of course, like stuff will always come out, like there might be like a couple bugs we might fix here and there like for patches and that sort of thing, but I think that that's like definitely like important, and I wish like I noticed a trend as well, like where we're trending in that direction. But I will say um, based on from what I've seen, like like I think like Sony Studios do a pretty good job, or at least like Naughty Dog, I feel like did a good job of like having like making sure like everything was completely like it was like pretty complete, like when like we ship games. I think Arcane does a pretty good job of that, and I think like knock on wood too. I think Survivor has done a pretty good job to where like we like what's gonna be out there is gonna be like pretty much the finished product that we want people to have. So.
Yeah, I mean, when I played Jedi Fallen Order, and I played it again recently, the PS, because originally when I played it on PC when
Mhm.
it first came out, and now I played it on the PS5 upgraded version, and like I couldn't really feel like there was. I know again they're technically two different versions, but even when I was playing the PC version, it nothing really was game breaking
Mhm.
where it's a cyberpunk situation
Oh
where
yeah.
you know that playing it on launch probably not going to be the best experience. Coming back 6 months later will probably give you a better experience. And I
Right.
mean, obviously, in the case of Naughty Dog, because they're veterans of the industry, they kind of go by their own release schedule, so they're not you know you know very tight on we definitely have to get it out for this month, for this year. And then you have Respawn, which obviously the team that make the games there, especially Titanfall, how he initially started, was part of the Call of Duty team. And if you
Mhm.
look at that history, Call of Duty, no matter what you think of it, when it came out, it always worked. Like like the
Yeah.
performance was always on point. I remember back in the day always moaning that the graphics don't look much better every year. It just looks like a reskinned Call of Duty from 3 years ago. And now I'm like, at least I knew every year when I got the new Call of Duty, I was gonna get a consistent experience. And technically speaking, plus also gameplay wise, there was, like I said, there was never anything major break that a you know game breaking.
Mhm.
Whereas you play Assassin's Creed, there's so many Assassin's Creeds that were throughout their history that had bugs on day one, and they were just horrible. They just
Yeah.
performed terribly. Whereas Call of Duty never really had those issues. And obviously bringing that talent and that sort of ethos over to Respawn, it's understandable what why their games, generally speaking, launch better than some other games.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like that's really important too, like as developers, at least from my perspective, like making sure the game is optimized, people can play it, and the game doesn't break. Like that's like number one, right? Like if we can't even play the game, then like everything else falls to the wayside, in my opinion. So that should always be a priority. So it is sad, like when there are games that are released that are clearly like they're broken, like like I wish that that there was more time spent on making it. There's also like at the same time there's also the pressure of like there's some unhealthy people within the gaming community that'll like send death threats or get really mad like when their game's not released. Like I heard some like some horrendous things like when Sony Santa Monica like took a little bit of time to like release their ship date for God of War Ragnarok. Even like people were like saying some terrible things or doing sending terrible things to developers on Twitter. So there's also that pressure as well. But yeah, like giving developers enough time to like give a polished piece to players is like really important. And for speaking on like someplace like Activision, like Call of Duty, like yeah, Call of Duty, they've been making Call of Duty and their 3-year development cycles for like years and years, like the three Call of Duty studios, Treyarch, Infinity Ward, Sledgehammer, so like they should have it down like pretty pat on like, the expected timelines and everything. Of course, I can't speak to that since I haven't worked on those particular studios, but from what I understand and from my friends that have worked there, um, but yeah, so I mean, working on like the Call of Duty like studio machine, like they know what like needs to get done and like how much needs to get done and that sort of thing, so they have maybe like a better understanding. And you also find too, I think that like sometimes if like a studio has never like done an open world game before or something like that, they might not be able to like plan out or realize like how much time they need in order to like release a game in a playable manner and that sort of thing. So yeah, there can be a lot of pressure from a lot of different fronts too to like get a game out the door as well. But yeah, in a perfect world, we'd all have enough time to like polish a game as much as we need to while like getting in players' hands in the best way possible.
Oh yeah, but having studios that don't polish it, it makes you appreciate the better ones. It's
Right.
that thing that if everything was good, nothing would be good
That
because
is
everything
true.
would just be the same. But like
Absolutely.
seeing these games, and it's not just with big titles. When you see a game from an indie developer come out, and they've put a lot of love, attention
Mhm.
into the game, and it's on a smaller scale, something that they can manage, but it's really good. You appreciate that as well. You like this feels like a work of art instead of just being released and it's buggy and it's not fun to play. But again, same with when you get a big game that gets released because whether it's Call of Duty, whether it's a Naughty Dog game, whether it's GTA 6, whenever that will come out, that you're gonna get a piece of art that a lot of people have handcrafted compared to just getting a game that you will forget. Like people have not forgotten GTA 5. It's still one of the
Absolutely.
most played games on the planet. It's still probably one of the most revenue generating
Hmm.
games on the planet, across 3 console generations. Whereas there'll be plenty of titles from 2013 that came out at the same time as GTA 5, and we just don't talk about it anymore.
Yeah,
So
that's true. A
you know,
legacy.
yeah, exactly. So it's definitely one of those things that you appreciate it more.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think like, working at some place like Naughty Dog too, like after working there and I've played games from other studios and I'm like, "Oh, like Naughty Dog wouldn't let us ship it like this," or whatever. Like I see something I'm like, "Oh, they wouldn't allow that like to happen or something." So yeah, just change your perspective like, yeah, based on like how different studios operate and stuff too. Like, like I always think that it's important, like especially like before I started working in the industry, I worked on smaller team games like outside school or in school, and like you really see like how important it is, at least to me, like having something that's like maybe smaller scope but like very polished is better than having something that's like way overscoped and you don't have time to like do any like multiple passes on something and like it's broken and that sort of thing. So that's one thing I really like in games too. Like I don't need like, I know a lot of people like open world games, so like to me like I don't need like a huge open world game with a bunch of stuff in it. Like I prefer like a smaller, more condensed experiences that like has like a clear story or whatever else, but it's like a polished piece of art that I can enjoy and appreciate.
Oh yeah, because Naughty Dog's, games are some of my, favorite of all time, especially, the Uncharted series and, now
Oh
more
yes,
recently, The Last of Us as well. But I remember, because I used to love, Uncharted, and when I was at university, like a friend or two of mine, would say, oh, it's not open world. And I'd be like, it doesn't matter. Like one,
yeah,
you have your open world games. I love some of those games as well, and they serve their part just the way Need for Speed serves its part. It's not I'm not playing Need for Speed in instead of Uncharted. They're two separate games. Plus,
right.
also, you play Uncharted. Yes, it's linear, and you can't go on an open map that's the equivalent of 1,000 square kilometers or something crazy like that. But everything feels rich and developed, and
Yep.
it feels like it should be there. It feels like it's in place
Yeah.
and not generic. And yeah, you're going through a linear story and a linear path, but it feels good. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because there'll be so many times I'll play a game and it could be Jedi Fallen Order, probably same with Jedi Survivor. It can be Last of Us, it can be Uncharted, and I'll look at it and some event will happen in the game, and I'll look and be like, that's obviously scripted, that's obviously going to happen. I can't get around that, happening. But I'm like, it looks good though. It feels
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong with that. It feels more like a movie.
Yeah, exactly. I love the cinematic kind of gaming experiences. That's what I love about Naughty Dog and Jedi team, where it feels like you're playing a movie. Because I obviously I love film a lot. But like yeah, like this the when it's something that's a little bit more like closed like system, it's not open world. It's like things are very it can be like very intentionally placed, and like there's so much attention to detail that you can put in the design methodology between like open world games and like I guess like closed world games, I guess we'll call it. It can differ a lot because like because people have so many choices in an open world game, like the design philosophy is going to be like very different because it has to work in so many different scenarios. It's also like difficult to make an open world game feel like it's like lived in and not just like a big old box like that doesn't have enough stuff. It's really expensive. They're really expensive to make. I'm sure they're even more expensive now because of how much like game and technologies have improved and how much we can put into games. But yeah, like to me, I don't know. I always love like smaller experiences. I get overwhelmed with open world games sometimes because there's so much in it. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I feel similar about it. Sometimes I'll play an open world game and I'm like, yeah, you got a few trees here, a few buildings here, but it just, this part of the open world feels similar to 10 minutes away in the open world. It
Right.
doesn't feel handcrafted, or it doesn't feel like, oh, it should be there.
Yeah.
It's weird, but yeah, I definitely know that as I've gotten older and I have less time to play on video games, I do appreciate more single player experiences and more story driven, linear experiences like Jedi Survivor, like Uncharted, like The Last of Us. Because I know, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna play an hour, because like the single player versus the multiplayer side, I could play an hour on multiplayer on Call of Duty Online, and I could just get annihilated by some 10-year-old in America, and I'm like, oh, like, and I'm not going to spend another 4 hours and have a good gaming session. And I kind of want a decent session every single time I play, and
Absolutely.
you know what you're getting. And yes, there's a lot with being always connected with some games, but it's a lot better than trying to play online. You play it, you put the single player game on, and you're in the game. Especially with modern consoles where the games load in seconds now, that experience is something now. Like I was saying, as I'm older, got more responsibilities, got a family, and I have less time. Something I do appreciate more, and I think it's kind of why I appreciate and enjoy. I used to love movies as a kid, but even more now, because you know I. I'll watch a movie for 2 hours. That's it. I'm all good. Whereas with doing an online game or like an open world game, I could spend 2 hours and just be gathering resources,
Yeah.
and just be thinking, did I really want to spend these 2 hours just gathering some, obscure wood to make some weapon that I probably won't have enough of in my next game session anyway?
Absolutely. And that's me, like for example in Skyrim, I'm like I'm always over encumbered because I just keep picking up stuff and I'm like not even finishing like any of the quests. So yeah, it can be very overwhelming. And I think it kind of comes down to like the players themselves because I think for people that like open world games and like RPG, like they like to like be able to create their own character, like make their own character, or just kind of like do whatever they want. It's always about, I don't know, escapism is a big thing I think for gamers as well. But like maybe for people like us, or at least speaking for myself, like I like playing like a character that already has, like, they already know like who they are, like they have, like, I like playing as a different person, because I'm not like playing to like just play as like a regular human that's just like myself. Like I like the escapism aspect of it. Like I already like the world to already be like well thought out and like lived in and everything like that. So it does really depend on like who the player is as well, and what they're looking for when they're going to games. Like some people, like I know some people that only play like first person shooter online games. Like there's people that only play Call of Duty, and sometimes people just play because they just want to play with friends, and yeah, so, and that's okay. But yeah, the only thing with open world is like it's expensive and it takes a lot from developers. So if gamers knew that, then I don't know, maybe they'd understand and stop asking for only open world games all the time.
Yeah. Uh, Plus, also, there's space for all types of games, like the space for all types of movies. Not every
Yep.
movie has to be a sci-fi movie or a superhero movie. It can be a rom-com. It can be a mindless action movie. You know what you're getting. Let's say when you go and watch Fast and Furious, that you're
Right.
not expecting that to be a Star Wars movie or a Christopher Nolan movie. And as such, I don't think you should expect it. And that's the same with video games. Like you was talking about, people who just play online games, online shooters. I remember when I used to be at college and at university, I used to have friends that would buy Call of Duty, and the first thing they would do is launch up the multiplayer. Whereas I would
Yeah.
be the guy that would finish the single player, and only then would I, for the most part, be launching the multiplayer up. And it
Right.
was so yeah. It does depend on the individual itself.
Yeah. I didn't even so I kind of like got into like, I guess, console gaming a little bit later, like, but for the longest time like I didn't even know like Call of Duty even had like single player campaigns, cuz I only heard people talking about a multiplayer. So, yeah, cuz that's kind of like a lot of the fan base does tend to lean more towards playing Call of Duty for multiplayer. Of course there's people who appreciate the campaign too, but it's also like the type of player, and then that also means the developers probably end up pouring more resources into their multiplayer experiences because they know how much people are going to be playing them.
Oh yeah. So, like, what are some of the best resources, in your opinion, for learning, to become a VFX artist? Like books, YouTube channels, online courses, anything you would recommend?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great online free resources and tutorials on YouTube. That's how I started out learning VFX on my own. While I was in school, we didn't have like we didn't really have like VFX courses or anything like that, or like anything that really taught us VFX. Like we learned a little bit of particles, but just very minimalistic. So that's how I started getting into it. Just there's even like 5-10 minute like quick easy YouTube tutorials you can do for VFX that are in like Unity and Unreal Engine. And then more recently, I've learned of other resources too, like Gabriel Aguirre Productions. He has a YouTube channel, and then he also has like a Udemy course. And then Jason Kaiser from Riot, he has VFX Apprentice. I think it's VFXapprentice.com. I think there's 10 hours of free introductory learning on that, and then he also has like different like packs of like VFX courses you can do. I think it's definitely possible to learn VFX though without like having to like pay for like those online courses per se, just in general, because that's kind of how I start out. But it's also all about like too, like, what you're putting in is what you get out of it. I mean, even now, like, even though I'm in the industry, like I still like want to learn. Like I'm still interested in taking classes. Like Nomon, for example, is like a pretty known like school for like game art or like film art and that sort of thing. Like I've been interested in taking classes there. Even like I bought like Gabriel Aguirre's production Udemy course. I haven't had time to go through it yet, but yeah, it's just always learning. There's always so many good resources you can get out there, and talking to people too. I learned I learned more about VFX in the industry as well, and working as a VFX artist in the industry from like an alum that I went to school with. His name is Austin Widmeyer. He works on Diablo 4 at Blizzard. So like people are good resources as well if you know how to like network and reach out to them too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely, networking can be, a very useful, part of your career. So talking about networking, uh, this is kind of a side question to networking, where you'll kind of segue into it. Did you go to university? If so, what did you study?
Yeah, so I kind of had a career change that I can talk about that a little bit later. But the game dev piece is I went to Michigan State University for games and interactive media. I got a bachelor's there. Um, and yeah, I chose, I did a lot of research into different schools, and I chose MSU because of their holistic approach to game dev education. Because I found that a lot of schools kind of pigeonholed students into like picking a career path like immediately within the industry. So like, oh, like you're like, so art path, so you're only going to take art class. Programming, you only take programming class, that sort of thing. But MSU's program allowed you to just like take, you can take programming, art, design, and they encourage you to too. And I think you need it to, in order to graduate, to take a variety of different classes. And I think it's really important to be able to do that. One, because even if you're not going to be working in that particular discipline, it's important to like understand kind of like that language, or understand like what those other disciplines go through, and it helps you work better with them and helps you be a better teammate as well. And the MSU also puts an emphasis on like creating a lot of team games within their program, which provides a microcosm of what like the like a bigger game dev studio would be like. And also like, when you work so closely with like other students and they become your friends, you start to feel like, understand like, okay, like there's another like human that I'm working with, like, and like also understand like what they're going through, like, like with their particular discipline and everything like that. So yeah, I really appreciate MSU for their program. And there's also a lot of good networking like opportunities, just like a lot of people, a successful alum from the industry. And I think with their being so holistic, a lot of successful like VFX artists and like tech artists came out of the industry, or came out of the school, because we were able to dabble in a lot of different aspects. And like VFX and tech art, for example, like they need a wide skill set, and not just a very pigeonholed skill set. That being said, though, like I think that like school can be very helpful for getting a job in the industry, but it's also very like individual driven. So like I've said this before, like what you put into it is what you get out of it. So like, even if you do go to like, like a high caliber school, like MSU is supposed to be number one in public university for game dev. Even if you go and graduate, like, that's not going to guarantee you a job. Like, you need to be doing stuff outside of school. You need to be like making stuff on your portfolio. Like, the industry is very difficult to get into regardless of where you go to school. And even if there's people that don't go to school, and people that go to small name schools and get in the industry because they work really hard to get into it. So school is definitely a way that can help like elevate, or kind of help like get you there in some ways. But you need to like put in the work to get, get into the industry on your own for sure.
Oh yeah. So, how important is going to university, in your opinion, to get in the gaming industry, or talking about that side of it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that like university can really help with like, one, like making connections and having a structured learning environment. And also just like an easy avenue to be able to work with a lot of like different people as well. Like I noticed like people in the industry who maybe haven't had those team experiences in school, or like, smaller experiences like game jams or side projects, like they might not always like be so like keen or able to communicate well with people from other disciplines once they start working, because you don't like understand like how these different pieces, how these different disciplines, we all like play with each, how anything we do in our job or don't do has an impact on someone else, right? And you can see that impact a lot more clearly when you're in a smaller experience, like, like a team game within a school. So it's very helpful in that way. Networking connections, and sometimes even like professors might have connections as well. So that could be helpful. Of course, my sidebar about like networking and connections in the game industry is like it could help you get a job, but obviously you need to have the quality. You need to meet the quality bar to like be good enough to even get that job. Um, But yeah, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I think that it can make an easier avenue in some ways to help you get a job. Like, sure, you can make games, like, in your basement alone, but one, you might not be getting that teamwork aspect. Two, you might not understand, like, like what, industry standard tools you need to do, or like, what you need to do to get into the industry if you're not having that, like, kind of like social, like, connection that you might have from school. Um, and I think it also depends on the school as well, because there's some um, schools or situations where, like, sometimes the professors, have never worked in the industry, or they haven't worked in the industry for like a really long time. And the industry is always changing. So, like, if, they're out of touch with the industry, then you kind of have to be careful, like, what they're like telling you, because it might be out of date information or not like proper information. So that's another aspect as well. But again, like, it's very self driven. So, I mean, regardless of whatever school you go to, just always, students should always be like doing stuff outside of school, or doing their own research, or, doing projects outside of school to get a job in the industry. So it depends on the individual, is what I would say. I like a structured learning environment. That's why I wanted like the foundation of going back to school for game dev. But some people, they might not necessarily need it if they're like self motivated enough, or can kind of do the research on their own. And that being said too, like, even though I did go to school, like, I'm like a self-taught like VFX artist, because like my school didn't teach it. It allowed me to be able to grow into that role, but I didn't learn it from school. Like, I learned it outside of school. So and that's what ultimately got me my job.
Okay. So you kind of alluded to your journey, of getting into the games industry, doing your bachelor's in games and interactive media. Before that, you did a bachelor's of science in nursing. So talk
Yes.
to us about that. Why you did a whole degree, like a 4 year degree in nursing, and then you transitioned to doing a games degree. Because what interests me about that transition is you finished in 2018 for your nursing degree. Then in 2019, you did your games degree. It wasn't like you did a job in nursing for 20 years and decided, okay, I want a career change. You did it straight away after, and and from what I can tell, you completed your nursing degree as well. So that because it's not like, oh, you did a year and you thought, okay, this definitely isn't for me, or switched. Like even that's a big switch from nursing to gaming. But talk to us about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, my path. So I guess for context, my parents were like immigrants from China, and they kind of were like, especially my mom was very traditional and like wanting me to get into healthcare, getting to nursing. My sister's a doctor. My mom's a nurse. And I think one thing that played a role into that too is like my dad had passed away when I was 6, and like my mom was able to get a job right away because she was a nurse. So I think that was one thing where she was like, "Oh, like the job stability is like really important. Like, getting a job that's like stable, and you can get a job in, and that sort of thing." And I don't know. I felt like I couldn't really, I didn't really have the opportunity to explore too much like what I wanted to do outside nursing. This one, my mom really wanted me to be a nurse, and I felt like other things were always like very discouraged for me to do. Like, my mom was even like, kind of against like video games and art growing up. So, I kind of just was like, I kind of like laid over, and I was just like, okay, like, I guess this is what I have to do. So yeah, I went to nursing school, and I knew from the first semester that it wasn't a good fit for me. Um, Excuse me. I remember I called my mom, and I was like crying. I was like, like, I don't want to, like, this isn't like right for me, and like, but my mom pretty much said, like, she wouldn't pay for school unless I went through nursing school. And I don't want to paint her as a villain, because I know I understand her reasonings for why she wanted to do that. She wanted, her kids to have a stable career and everything, and that's kind of what she knew, and her culture from being from China, and her being a nurse and everything. But yeah, it was a very miserable 4 years for me. It was very bad. It was pretty dark too. Like, there's definitely times where like I was driving to school, and I was like, I like it's terrible, but like I was like, I wish I'd get in a car accident, like, so that like I would be too injured or die, so I wouldn't have to keep going to school. So yeah, it got very dark, but I just felt like that's what was like my only option really, um, to continue on with school. So and then it wasn't until my last year of school, nursing school, I actually got into a doctorate nurse practitioner program for psychiatry, like to be a psych NP, because that was like one aspect of nursing that I did like, and I do like helping people, like as a core as a person, like being compassionate toward people and comforting and everything. So that was something that I was genuinely interested in doing, but you know, the boyfriend I had at the time was like, like you don't have to like be like subjected into doing this your whole life. Like there's other things you can do. And he like mentioned, like why not like game development? Like, you love games, like you're artistic, you like computers and technology. And I was like, okay. So I started looking into that and like just like reading about it and like looking it up. Like I was like, this sounds like me, like this sounds like something that is a good fit for me. So I did a lot of research into different game dev schools and like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I've talked about like why I chose MSU, and that was kind of what I ultimately decided to do. So like once I graduated nursing school, I the DNP program, the doctorate program, I like said no to them, which was difficult to do, of course. But I needed to follow my passions. But I got my nursing license, and then 2 weeks after, I moved to Michigan because I got a job out there, and then I worked as a nurse. Just worked as a nurse for a year to get in-state tuition at MSU, and then I was at MSU for another 2 years. I was supposed to be there for 3 years, and I was working as a nurse during that time. The first like semester or two, I had like I was working as a nurse and as a server. I was also like a server at Olive Garden too, trying to pay the bills because I was financially independent at that time. I was trying to pay for school out of pocket. Like I had like almost 3 or 4 like nursing jobs throughout my time. Like at the same time, while going through game dev school, while having a full course load, and because I was like willing to do anything in order to get like a job in the industry at that point, and also like you said, like like I hadn't been working as a nurse for 20 years or anything like that, and like I knew early on that I didn't want to be that person that worked the same job for 25 years and hated it and hated life, like because I believe too that like we spend so much time at work, and like if we're unhappy with our work, then we're going to be unhappy with life. Like if we're depressed at work, like we're going to be like a depressed person, and I just wasn't willing to settle for that. So yeah, I worked really hard to get into the industry. I like planned it like very meticulously, actually, like even before I started school. Like I planned every class I was going to take. Like I looked up all the professors, I like looked up who I was wanted to impress. Like I looked up, like our school had like something called the Gel Lab, which was like their in-house like game dev lab that you can be employed in by like the head of the game dev program. And I was like, this is when I want to be able to get into that or like get an internship. So everything was very meticulously planned, and I ended up actually like getting into like I ended up accomplishing everything faster than I thought it was than I thought I would. And but I think that like what played a large role in like my success was the planning and also like the obsession with getting a job in the industry too. There was like a quote from, I think, like a Steve Bartlett podcast that I forgot what the guy's name was, but he said like interested people watch obsessed people change the world, and I like really believe that. I also believe that there was another quote I read too that was like, if you don't want to be like everyone else, then don't do what everyone else does. And that's kind of what my philosophy has been too. And like those two things have kind of like led up to my success. Like I always like believe in doing above and beyond, or like doing things that like isn't always just like the status quo. So yeah, that was pretty much my path, and I got an internship at Activision like after like my second year of school, and at that point I was like, I was not able to sustain that lifestyle of like being a nurse and going to game dev school. Like I was sleeping like 3 to 5 hours, like sometimes eating one meal, maybe not. Like it was not a good situation. And I was just like, I'm ready to work. So I applied to jobs, and just like one weekend on a whim, not necessarily expecting to hear anything back because I still had another year of school left as well. And it was pretty validating to like get like interviews from a lot of like major studios and for the different disciplines that I was interested in because I was like a tech artist, and I was also interested in like rigging and tools and VFX, and I was getting like interviews for all of those positions from places like Blizzard and like High Moon, EA, and Naughty Dog. And it wasn't until like I kind of had like the offer in front of me from Naughty Dog that I was like, I think I want to like do VFX because, like I said before, I was like a tech artist, and so I basically like chose that I wanted to commit to like being a VFX artist and like working at Naughty Dog. And luckily, like I had a really good relationship with my professors at MSU and also like the undergraduate director. So I asked like if I could still graduate and get my diploma even though I had a year left of school, and they worked with me and they like waived the rest of my credits. So was able to work at Naughty Dog early and like get my diploma, and yeah, so it was like it worked out really great, and I'm really grateful too for like my MSU faculty for working with me on that. And I've been able to accomplish so much in that year that I wasn't at school as well. So yeah, so that's kind of been my path, and I'm glad I made the switch. And there are times that I do miss actually like being a nurse or just like helping people. So that's why I always like try to like reach out and do like mentorship or like teaching and that sort of thing when I can. Or I even picked up a side nursing job like just for like weekends once in a while because I did kind of miss psych nursing to some extent. So, but yeah, that's kind of my path.
So yeah, I mean that's definitely a interesting and crazy path, and I think that's good for the audience to hear because uh, I hear a lot of people say I want to become a programmer, I want to get into the gaming industry, I want to do this and that, I can't do that because I'm in this field, or I might not even have a degree, and the amount of people I get on the podcast like yourself that have done something different to what they're doing now, it, it's just crazy. So yeah, it's definitely inspiring, and it's definitely something that a lot of people can take the lessons from your story, and because it's very interesting that you did finish your degree as well in nursing, and then like you said, you did do like a year or so of working in it, and you still dabbling in there because you do enjoy it, to an extent, but you knew it wasn't something that you wanted to do for the next 40, 50, 60 years of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that in general, like people from my scene are like afraid of change, or they kind of like let fear kind of control their life. And like I never wanted, to live my life that way. I always wanted to like live without like having any regrets of like, changing my career or anything like that. And I was just like ready. And to me, like I'm not like deterred by fear in life. I think like if I feel like afraid, and not talking about like, risky stuff like I don't know, drugs or like bad stuff, but like if I feel afraid, sometimes that's like a good indication for me to like, okay, like I need to go and do that thing because I feel that fear. And then I end up feeling excited about it. And a lot of the best things from my life were things that like I took like calculated risks on, or um, you know had fears about initially. Like I was really afraid like when I got the email from Naughty Dog and like they wanted me to work there. Like it's scary, but like those are like it's so important to make those major change. Like even me moving to Michigan, or when I went to school in Arizona State, like moving to a completely different state, like it changes you, and it's always worth like just taking that risk, taking that gamble for yourself and for your life, and it makes you like a better person for it too. So I always encourage people to just do it. That Shia LaBeouf meme I love to send to people. I'm like when he's like, just do it. Like yesterday you said tomorrow, so just do it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Having a go, and just you know trying, because if you think you're gonna get it perfect, you're definitely not going to.
Right.
So you started off your game journey at Activision. What titles did you work on there, and like what work did you specifically do at Activision?
Yeah, so at Activision, the two titles that I worked on that are out are Call of Duty Vanguard and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the one that released last year. Yeah, the last two releases. I was on their Central Tech Experience team, which was a little bit different than like their regular game development teams. They were like a little bit of a step removed from like their game development teams, like Treyarch, Sledgehammer, and Infinity Ward, where they were like a research and development team, but they also did like they also provided assets for um, excuse me the dev teams. So like one of the major goals of the Essential Tech Experience team is to basically create like technology to help like push the visuals of real time graphics to that of like film quality. So there was a lot of like new technology that was being worked on. There's like mocap, a lot. I did a lot of facial likeness acquisition stuff over there, which is basically taking an actor sits in a light rig, which is like this big ball with a bunch of lights and like I think 36 DSLR cameras, and they make different facial expressions, and these cameras take a bunch of pictures of their face from all different angles, and then so that becomes a scan that gets put into the computer, and then on my end, like I help like clean up that mesh and everything, and then send it off to the developers for their games. So that was a lot of what I did. Also, like helping build some of the technology for Call of Duty as well. Yeah, so that was a really unique experience. I was a tech art intern, so I wasn't a like VFX artist at that time. So it was a lot of just like experimentation and just kind of like going with the flow and like being thrown into stuff and like figuring stuff out and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was an exciting thing to experience. And a lot of my friends that I have now are from the internship program or from Activision. So that was yeah, that was like a great like opportunity and a great way for me to get my foot in the door. And it was all remote too. Like that was like right around like when COVID hit. I think like 2021 summer. And that was like the first time I think that they did, or the second time they did all remote. And I kind of took the reins with just like helping the other interns with like managing information and also helping them feel connected too. Like I was like putting together like social events or like gaming nights like all through Discord and everything, and like organizing people into like different like groups every week so that everyone would kind of chit chat and talk to each other, and just kind of like spearheaded that to the point where like the other interns were calling me like intern manager and everything. I definitely wasn't doing it just for like for that title, but I was just wanted to, I don't know, I just felt like there was a need for that, and I was always kind of someone who kind of filled the role in like leadership positions, that sort of thing. And I just wanted people to feel like connected, and um, yeah, so that was my internship experience at Activision.
Okay, so how does Activision compare to Naughty Dog and more recently Respawn?
Yeah, so yeah, the team I was on at Activision was pretty different because again, it was like it wasn't a dev team, and there was only like a team of 8. So it was a little bit removed from the typical game dev production pipeline. I will say as an intern, I mean, I had a good experience there. I think for the most part, like there's like good perks of working at Activision and everything. I can't speak for it like too generally, since I wasn't working on a traditional dev team, but I did have a good experience there. There's perks of working at like a bigger studios, bigger like corporations. um Naughty Dog, I think I was at Naughty Dog for the longest period of time. But with every studio, there's gonna be some variance. Generally speaking, like Activision has a lot of different studios. There's a lot of different people working on the games. Naughty Dog is basically like one team that like works on all the different games. Like Naughty Dog usually just works on. Traditionally, they've only like worked on one game at a time, but recently, like they've worked on like 2 or 3 games at a time. So that's been something that's new for them. But like it's just like basically one Naughty Dog team. So there's just like basically one Naughty Dog culture as well. At Respawn, each of the different dev teams are very different. Like the Apex team is very different from the Jedi team. Um, and Naughty Dog in general, I think, was like a good experience to me. There's a lot of like wonderful, talented people working there, and I really respect their passion for their games and improving like technology behind games. Um, and yeah, I think like working there, like I could really feel like why Naughty Dog has such a reputation for like their high standards in their games. Um, and yeah, I think Naughty Dog also has more of a laissez-faire approach to work. There's like less like just in general like less like major oversight, I guess, like from like management or production. Like they trust people to be able to do their work and like be able to make decisions and everything, and also like give feedback to other departments and everything. And the hierarchy is really flat there too, so like everyone has a voice. And since Naughty Dog is like very established and been around for a long time, they have a very established set of values and culture there, which can be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. Um, and another thing too to note about Naughty Dog from my experience is like the staff was very social. So like a lot of Naughty Dog people were friends outside of work. You know, they'd like play volleyball together, or like when I was at Naughty Dog, it we weren't forced into the office, but a lot of people like voluntarily wanted to come in the office because we wanted to see our coworkers. So like I had lunch almost every day with my coworkers there, which was really nice. In contrast, the Jedi team at Respawn is a lot newer because the Jedi team was, kind of like started to get established with Jedi Fallen Order. So it's still really new. Sidebar too, like the Survivor team is really new to the studio as well because a lot of people from the first game ended up leaving like the studio for various reasons. I'm not entirely sure like all the reasons. So a lot of people on the Survivor team right now are actually people from Sony Santa Monica that had worked on God of War Ragnarok. So we have a lot of Ragnarok people that have worked on the Survivor game. Um, but yeah, in contrast, like the Jedi team at Respawn, because it's newer, they're still establishing like its culture and workflows, which can be exciting to be able to help and build and grow a team that's starting out like all at the same time at a studio. My experience with Jedi team is that there was definitely like a push for quantity and improving on everything from the last game. Um, and most of the staff at Respawn are remote too, so like not a lot of people come into the office voluntarily, so it could feel a little bit more disconnected socially at times. But yeah, like at the end of the day, I think like each studio varies so much, and each team at a studio can vary a lot too. That like it really just comes down to like the individual and like the best fit for them. Like at each studio, like there's stuff that people like love and hate about like every place that like I've worked at. So, but yeah, overall, like I feel like my experiences at all the studios I worked at are like I've been treated better than I was in the healthcare industry. So I'll also say that too.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard about the healthcare industry, can be pretty intense, and the salaries aren't always, the best over
Yeah,
there. So yeah, it's definitely different.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, what parts are, this is a question for Last of Us Part 1 that you worked on, Jedi Survivor that's, coming out, and Call of Duty games. Like, which aspects did you specifically work on? So, like, if somebody loads up that game, like, which things can you say, when you see that part in the game or those visual effects, I had a hand in that?
Yeah, so I guess partially backstory. I was initially hired at Naughty Dog to work on the multiplayer project, but I got moved over to the Last of Us Part One because I had a coworker that died tragically and suddenly. So I ended up like, and she was a lot more senior than me too by a couple years, and but I ended up like taking on the areas that she was supposed to have worked on, which I was grateful for the opportunity to be able to do. Um, so the section that I worked on was Pittsburgh, which is like the biggest area of the game. And so I did like in-game ambient effects, in-game cinematics, and cinematics. Basically, like yeah, definitely like almost like every cinematic within the Pittsburgh level or area is something that I worked on. Like the truck scene, whether like driving through the rain, like Joel getting like kicked into the water, and Ellie shooting him, like a lot of different cinematics in there. And then because of like how quickly I was kind of able to like work with the areas I was assigned, I was able to like get my tasks down to zero like the fastest on the team. And then I was like offering help to like my other coworkers, and then my boss also gave me my VFX lead at the time, Evan Cook. He gave me the reins on being like point of contact for the model viewer. So I was in charge of like implementation of like the VFX within model viewer for the Last of Us Part One. And then for Jedi Survivor, I did mostly ambient VFX things. Some of them are kind of connected, I guess, like in-game cinematics to some extent. And then we outsourced a lot of the cinematic VFX to like VFX studios outside of the studio. But most of what I did was on Kobo, on the Kobo planet. Um, and yeah, I did a couple other planets as well. I don't want to like spoil like too much, but yeah, I did a lot of ambient work. For Naughty Dog, like I did a lot of like, I guess like for like all studios, I did a lot of like fire, smoke, water things, dust, mist, um, cloud work. That's yeah. There was on that trailer like one of the scenes where there's like open clouds was an area that I worked on as well. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers what I did about the studios.
It covers everything. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait. It's just 2 days now for Jedi's Survivor for me because it's Wednesday
Yeah,
now for me. So yeah, I'm super pumped for that game,
yeah.
and I'm just hoping there's not a big update,
No,
to the game so I can start playing it as soon as possible. So you mentioned
absolutely.
that when you joined Naughty Dog, you initially joined the multiplayer team. I'm
Yep.
assuming that was the Last of Us Part Two multiplayer. What can you tell us about that? Because we're still waiting for that. I'm assuming that's what you joined.
Yeah, it's I have to think about what has already been announced. I don't think they said it was The Last of Us Part Two multiplayer. But yeah, I can't really say much about it. And I was only on there for a couple months, so like I can't really go into detail about it. But I think that what they're doing is interesting because Naughty Dog has done multiplayer for other Last of Us games, and I think even Uncharted 3 they had the multiplayer as well.
They did,
But I
yes.
think that they kind of tied in what they usually do for like their single player games and was able to kind of meld it with this new multiplayer experience. Like again, I'm not going to go into detail, but I think that it is exciting and different, and like hopefully people will like it, and of course has the Naughty Dog touch and quality. So yeah, I think people will like it, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do as well because I was still in like I was working on like early stages of it, so I'm sure things have changed since then. But yeah, I really believe in that studio, so sure it'll be great.
Is it coming out this year?
I don't think I can say anything.
Because we're all waiting
Yeah,
for that game.
yeah. Gotta be
Uh,
patient.
yeah. So Naughty Dog is it's a huge studio. It's considered one of the best in the world. What made you leave it for Respawn?
Yeah, like overall, Naughty Dog was like a really great experience for me. At the time, I was like contract worker there, so Naughty Dog usually like when they first hire people, unless like you're senior level or like other departments, usually like in general they hire people as contracts, and then after like a year or two, then they'll move people to full time. But you know partially because of that, I it kind of gave me the flexibility to like if I wanted to leave, like it would be easier to do that than versus if I was full time. I definitely could have seen myself like continuing to work at Naughty Dog, but I also wanted the experience of working at a like different studio because it's difficult. Like honestly, like working at like a studio that's supposed to be like like one of the best studios in the world, and that's like one of the most difficult studios in the world to get into. I was like, I want to like like I wanted to know like what else like is there, like what else am I missing out on, like what makes Naughty Dog like the best, because I didn't have that perspective, of course. Like I knew like Naughty Dog, I understood why it was, but like I wanted like that experience. And I think like within the industry you find a lot of people that move around, getting different experiences, especially early on before they figure out, like what's like the best fit for them and everything. But I wasn't like seeking any jobs at the time, but because Respawn reached out to me and they were like, "You want to work on like Star Wars Jedi Survivor?" I'm like, "Oh, like yeah, of course." I'm like, I want to work on Star Wars. Like that's cool. Like Jedi Fallen Order is one of my favorite games, and I didn't want to have any regrets too. Like if I turned it down and like years later, I'm like, "Oh, like what if I worked on that Star Wars?" I didn't want to have that feeling, and I also knew like that I had a good relationship with Naughty Dog, and a lot of my VFX coworkers like um they like worked at Naughty Dog and left and then came back. So like I know like that was like a common thing that like just kind of happens with Naughty Dog just in the industry in general. So I kind of knew like if I wanted to go back later down the road, like I'm sure that door will still be open. But I didn't want to turn down. the like chance to work on Star Wars or like have a different experience at a different studio. So I'm really glad I did because like I made some like really great friends at Respawn as well, and I'm glad I did get to work on like Star Wars. It's definitely on my bucket list. So, but yeah, I mean, I didn't leave because I was like I don't know jaded or Naughty Dog or had like issues or anything like that. I think that like I have a lot of respect for Naughty Dog too. Like I think that like they're also like very aware of like like any like flaws or like things they need to work on, and like they were like active in like trying to like remedy like whatever issues they had. It was like always like whenever I had some anything come up, like it was easy for me to talk to my lead or like address problems really quickly. And yeah, I don't know, I feel like yeah, there's no studio like Naughty Dog. I think like just I don't know, they're just like a caliber of their own in terms of their quality of work and the people that work there. And so yeah, like I can't say enough about like the the studio as a whole. So
Okay, so have you played Jedi Fallen Order, and are you a big Star Wars fan?
yeah, I played Jedi Fallen Order a couple times. I think I played it like two times before like my interviews at Respawn, and I definitely like Star Wars. I wouldn't say like I'm a like a mouth foaming Star Wars fan per se, but I've seen all the movies. Like I like the Star Wars world, but I'm not actually like someone that fights with people over Star Wars things like a lot of Star Wars fans do. But yeah, I love Star Wars.
Okay, what's your favorite Star Wars movie?
Gosh, I think, like when I was a kid, I kind of like hated the original like Anakin Star Wars movies. I think like as we all did, but like in recent times, like I think I've really grown to appreciate them. Like the first actually I think the second and third episode might be like my favorites. Maybe more so leaning towards the third because of I think that Hayden Christensen did a really good job of like being like evil Anakin, and I think that he had like a captivating performance with that. And it was interesting to see because I think initially like as like a kid or whatever, like we're like, oh, like Anakin, like why did they portray Anakin as this like kind of like annoying bratty kid, he's supposed to be Darth Vader. But I think like you can clearly see like that like they create like the Jedi Council and people like they basically created this monster. Like he is a product of his own environment. Really, like he was trying to be good, but they literally like pushed him into the hands of Palpatine. So that's really
Yeah, they
interesting
snubbed
to
him
see.
off,
What?
on multiple occasions, and they never listened to him.
Absolutely,
Uh,
yeah. It was sad. I was like, dude, this guy's trying to be good, and you guys are just like purposely like being mean to him. And Palpatine was the only one nice to him. And Palpatine's performance, I forgot the actor's name. Is it Peter?
Ian
Oh,
McDermott.
Peter? Oh, yeah, I think so. Oh, yeah. He was like he's amazing too, and he's just like really funny too. Like just the way like his the things that he say are so iconic, and I think he used to be a Broadway actor too. So like I don't know,
Yes, he
there's so many
was.
funny things from that. The Last Jedi is also an interesting one too because I didn't like it when I first watched it, but after watching it a couple more times, like I think it was interesting what they were trying to do with showing like the gray area of the Force. Like it wasn't always like super like black and white, like and I think that was jarring for a lot of people to watch because it was like the good guys aren't always like getting the best of luck. Like in this one, like bad stuff was happening to them, and I think that was jarring for people, but I think it did something different with um with the Star Wars like movies. Rogue One, it might be my favorite overall though, but yeah, I've talked about Star Wars movies too much probably.
Yeah,
But yeah.
the yeah Rogue One was definitely a good one, because I'm not a big fan of me. Well, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I'm not a big fan of the Disney movies outside of
Mhm,
Solo and Rogue One. I didn't like
mhm.
the Rey, Finn,
Yeah,
the Kylo trilogy. Uh, there were
they could have
some parts
handled it
of it
better, I
I
think.
did like, but I do prefer the original trilogy and
Yes.
the prequel trilogy as well, because I mean, even at the time, I always loved, the prequel trilogy with, obviously showing, young Anakin, him growing up, Hayden Christensen, and like you were saying, seeing that arc, seeing that transition, and seeing it, and especially now that we're older, you look at it and you think, yeah, like they definitely did not treat him as good as they probably could have. Like the whole thing, not making him Jedi Master,
Yeah,
and then when they was going to get Palpatine, like just putting him always to the side and never
exactly.
listening to him, even though by that point he had clearly shown that he was capable and probably one of the best there.
Right.
So it's like it's not even like he's 10 years old at that point and he's only just started. So there definitely was an element to that. And reading the books and the comics, so some of the stuff that I've learned is that during his time at the Jedi Temple and his training, he actually was bullied by the other students. He didn't really have
Mm,
any friends there. He
wow.
was very attached to Obi-Wan, but outside
Yeah,
of that, he didn't really get on with people. But everyone knew him because he was the chosen one, and everyone knew that he was very capable. But he didn't really have friends. So you see that, and you're like, you know, nobody really helped that case. And it's not just about, oh, he became Darth Vader, and as a result, he did all these things. It's that the Jedi should have, if they're meant to be protectors of the galaxy and protectors of peace, it should start with making sure that their own is taken care of.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's where like the Jedi are kind of problematic, and probably showed why like Luke's character was like screw the Jedi and stuff, because he was a product of his environment, and it's like hard not to kind of like feel bad for him after like how he was treated. Like, what was he supposed to do? Like when everyone was treating him as a villain already. And I always think it's funny too, because they kept saying like, oh, he's supposed to bring balance to the Force, and it's like it's unbalanced. The Force is currently unbalanced, like on to where like the good guys are obviously like more in power. So he did kind of bring balance to the Force by like being ended up being like really like the worst, like the or the best like Sith or whatever you want to say, for being so evil. So I always think that's funny as well. But yeah, and it's hard not to feel sympathy for him looking back on it for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I know you didn't, work on Jedi Fallen Order, but can you talk about the overall project? How it, compared between the two games, the scale, the development processes, and working on Jedi Survivor. How, because you must have seen from people that you worked with that transition going from the previous game to this, and the discussions they must have had, because Jedi Fallen Order was a very successful game in terms of reviews and sales. So that must have formed the decisions of making Jedi Survivor.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so like again, like you were saying, like I didn't work on the first game, but there was actually a lot of new folks on Survivor in general. I think there was definitely a decent amount of people that left from the first game, and so there was a lot of people that were brought on for the second game. I think overall, like the scope of Survivors was bigger than Jedi Fallen Order. Like we can expect like like a bigger game. Like there's more in it, of course. Like we've seen like customization that's been out, the different stances and everything. So like I think that like everything that Fallen Order, and I speak as a fan too, because I was a fan before I started working at here, has been improved on. Like every good thing has been improved on, and I think like any like issues that were there before have been pretty much like dealt with or eliminated or whatever else. So yeah, from what I've heard too, I think that like the development process was smoother for like the second game. And I think that's pretty natural to happen too, right? Like when when we do something for the first time, it might not always like we're still figuring out what we're doing, but then as we do it more times, we figure out what we're doing. And I think that was a similar process with Survivor. And I think a lot of times in games too, you see that like if it's like a trilogy or something, like for example, or a series like Uncharted, like from Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 2, like Uncharted 2 is in my opinion is like probably one of the best games, or it has a big jump in quality from the first to the second one, or even like Mass Effect, between Mass Effect 1 and 2. And I think that Survivor also has like is also falls into that as well, to where like I think that this is like even better game than the first game. And yeah, I think a lot of people are gonna really like it. And yeah, like I said, I think the development in general was probably smoother. than the first game as well. Of course, there's always things to work on and improve on, and like I said, like the Jedi dev team is like newer to the studio, so like still building up that culture and like the workflows and communication is something that will need to be like built upon and worked on and everything. But yeah, I think that the team is like really talented, and yeah, the game's I'm sure people are gonna really like the game. I mean, I love it as a fan. I think it's definitely better than the first game. I'm biased, of course, but in my humble opinion.
Okay, so in like, how does the game length compare to Jedi Fallen Order? Because Jedi Fallen Order was a pretty long game. Is it longer, shorter, about the same?
That is a good question. I don't know if that's been talked about and if I can say anything. But I can say that, considering that, everything from the first game has been like improved on or scope has been bigger, you might be able to expect that there will be more content than there was in the first game. Yeah, so that's what I can say.
Okay, so how closely do you work, as a VFX artist, work with other departments such as development and testing?
Yeah, so again, I think it might depend a little bit on this per studio and studio culture. Um, Me as like a person, like individual in industry, like I really like talking to the people I work with, even the people like outside of my VFX department. So like, if I'm in an area, like, Kobo or whatever, a specific area in Kobo, like I like to talk to the environment artists and I like to talk to like lighting artists and like, really understand the area really well and like work closely with them. Not everyone does that, but that's something that I do. There's times where like, we need help from design or programming in order to like hook something up like VFX wise. So that those are times where I would reach out to design or programming. Testers are important, of course. Like the VFX team, we had kind of like our like a designated tester that would help us. Of course, all the testers like they help like everyone, but we kind of had like a point of contact for testing. But I would usually reach out to them like if like I had a bug for something and it's like, oh, I can't reproduce this bug on my own. Like, is this still like a bug that's still happening, or like what can I do to load into it? That sort of thing. Overall, I think it's generally important to keep in contact with the people you're working with. I think too, like throughout the production pipeline, the team collaboration might look a little bit different too throughout. Because I worked at Naughty Dog and Respawn both at the tail end of like when the games were being shipped. Like I was kind of like near like like usually when like most of the work happens. So but I think like if you're early on in the like pre-production, which is like kind of like early on in the production pipeline is what we call it, pre-pro. Then you might have like more like brainstorming sessions, or you might be talking to the other departments more just to like I don't know figure things out. But yeah, it can vary a lot. I am always an advocate of people like across different disciplines communicating and talking with each other, and I think it's really important to like know who you're working with, and have like a good team bond with them as well. And I think maybe that's like my background. Like I used to play sports. Like, I used to be a competitive volleyball player, and I love to like know who I'm working with, and I like to know like what they're doing and how my work will impact them, and vice versa. And it also just makes your life easier too when you have that, because I think some people might work in a very isolated way, but if you know the other person behind the screen that you're talking with, like they'll be willing to help you and you'll be willing to help them, and like it makes it so much easier to be able to do things, like even when you're in a stressful situation, like it helps so much to have that support.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, I mean, what's it like working in the gaming industry, as a woman?
Yeah, so I think I saw a statistic that it was like 70 to 80% of the industry is like white men, and I also by observation I would probably say like that's pretty accurate. I think that the industry as a whole is trying to like promote diversity and also try to recruit people from various backgrounds and everything. I will say though too, like I wouldn't like blame the game industry for like having a ton of that demographic, like white males, because that also kind of leans more to like I mean, even my personal experiences, like I never had any girlfriends that played games growing up. Like I didn't know any game girls that played games growing up. So like, there's like a lesser percentage of girls like playing games and also like that want to get into games. It doesn't happen as much in general. But I guess like, exposure to like at a young age, like girls like understanding like, oh, like, like you can work in STEM and that sort of thing. I've heard all statistically like research based, like that's how actually helps more women get into STEM and tech and game dev and everything. And like as a kid, I never thought game dev was an option either, too. So that's another thing. But I think that like overall, like I haven't experienced issues with like me being a woman in the industry in the sense like I haven't felt like I was discriminated against or anything. I think like from what I know and from what I've compared to talking to other like peers and stuff, like I get paid fairly as well. So yeah, I don't feel like I've had any issues with that. There are times where like yeah, like I am the only girl in a meeting and it can be like no one like perpetuates anything like in terms of like oh like you're the only girl or anything, but it just like the feeling of kind of like being you can clearly tell like you're like the only one of yourself there, is definitely a feeling that comes up sometimes. And initially like when I was like working at Respawn, we have like I think a team of 12 or 13 like VFX and destruction artists, and I was the only girl, and I was like the only like minority for a little bit of time, until we hired more destruction artists, I think. And it was like I was like, oh, like just a natural. I think it's just a natural thing that happens. It's like, oh, like a little bit of imposter syndrome, but also like, oh, like, I hope they don't think like I'm like dumb because I'm like a girl and young and everything. It's just something that pops up in your head that you can't really help. Even though like I've been very respected in the industry, and I will say that too. Like I feel like people in the industry have been very respectful toward me, and like they definitely like applaud like my efforts, or like I haven't been discriminated against or anything. So yeah, that's been my experience. And yeah, a lot of my even my friends like outside of like work or guys too, like they're game devs in the industry and everything. So like yeah, it's definitely I don't know, it's very male centric, but it's also welcoming to people of other um I don't know, other like demographics and
No,
cultures.
yeah. I mean, it's good to hear that your experience has, been good, and overall there hasn't been any, issue specifically because you do hear about it. But I think the industry as a whole is generally getting better, and
Yes.
it's good to hear from somebody who's in the industry. It's easy, from somebody outside, women from outside who's never been in the industry to make assumptions, and then it's the same for the men as well. And you for we'd say your pay has been in your opinion fair for the title that you have, because I know that's a huge thing that people don't factor in when they talk about the remuneration that women receive in whatever industries, whether it's gaming, whether it's tech. And it's that you know you got to look at like for like. Obviously, there's two different problems. There's the problem of having reasonable pay for the work that you're doing and the position you're in, but then there's also the separate issue of, is there more women at the higher level who earn more, which brings the average up or down,
Right.
for women, and obviously for men as well. And obviously if there aren't women on the executive level as much, then yes, the average is going to be lower. That's the reason looking at a general average is not the best thing, is to say, okay,
Of
a
course. Yeah.
VFX artist in the game industry with this much experience, how does that compare to a white male, for example, or a guy in general? And if that's obviously 20% lower, then clearly there's a divide. But if that's about the
Right.
same, then okay, it seems like they're paying about the same, and there may just not be as many women on the executive, the managerial level. And again, that's a separate conversation, but that's not
Of course.
necessarily a a pay discussion. It's totally different.
Right. Yeah, and I'm also grateful too. Like I feel like there's definitely men in the industry that advocate to like make sure things are fair, I think. Like, when I was getting my first job at Naughty Dog, like I think even before I started or started talking to them, one of my friends who's a VFX artist was talking to me about like, hey, like, like 'cause he didn't want me to be paid unfairly, so he's like, okay, like expect like this try to like advocate for around this much, like based off of like where like Naughty Dog is, and everything else, like to make sure that I was getting paid fairly, which I really appreciate, like the transparency. And a lot of I think a lot of game devs, or at least like I think my friend group, like we talk about like how much we're getting paid too. Like we're very like open about that, which is also really helpful. Like we'll even look at like I've sent like benefits package like for my friends to look at, and we talk about it, we compare it and everything. So like that's I think it's one of the rare things probably either for the industry or maybe just like the age generation where we're like actively talking about these things to make sure everyone's getting paid fairly, or seeing if there's like better opportunities elsewhere, that sort of thing. And yeah, and initially like when I Naughty Dog asked me how much I was expecting to get paid and stuff, and I told them too. I was like, this is kind of like the number that I would like based off where I live and like the work I'm doing and my title and everything. And I also said that, like, I just want to make sure, like, I'm being paid, like, if I'm doing the same amount as, like, a man, like, the same work, same job title, I expect to be paid the same amount regardless, right? Like, if I'm doing the same amount of work. So yeah, that's definitely what I believe. Like, if we're outputting the same thing or same job title, like, we should be getting paid fairly, and like, the same amount. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
So, what's been your biggest, regret in your journey so far? Because you worked at, a bunch of different studios, a variety of big titles. You've had a big transition from nursing to the gaming industry. So, what's been your biggest regret in your journey? Plus, also, what advice would you give to someone else that's looking to follow in your footsteps that might be a bit lost about, what they want to do?
Yeah, for sure. I don't necessarily think I have any like major regrets. I would say like going through nursing school and everything, like I felt kind of bitter initially about it, because I was like, oh, like, I wasted so much time, and that I could have spent, I could have already been in the industry before then. But I think that like going through that experience like really did help me grow. Like my experience working in the hospitals, like being able to communicate with different people, like my more like leadership experience too, like even working in nursing, like all that stuff has helped me so much to the point where like by the time I started game dev school, like I already was like pretty like sure of myself, or like I knew how to communicate. Like I kind of had like a better footing starting out. Like I knew how to talk to people and everything. And was more confident as well, because when I first started my first round of undergrad, like I definitely had like self confidence issues, and I was like had social anxiety, and like didn't know how to talk to people and stuff. And like, I think that like all those years spent, all that time like leading up to game dev, like has really like helped me, rather than me jumping into it right away. And also like me going through nursing school and taking anatomy classes, and like I don't know, that did kind of help inform me too, like with like making like rigs or like animation or timing and stuff like that. Like it did actually help me. So yeah, like I can't completely say like that's like a regret of mine. I think that like every experience like in life in general like teaches us something, like even if it's like failures or things that we didn't get, like things work out the way they do for a reason, I think. But we should also be in control of our lives as well, making decisions that benefit us and not for other people. I find that a lot of times, and in my situation too, and I see it a lot too, people that I've went to high school with and or college with initially, and they, maybe have regrets of like choosing the path they chose, because we get forced into choosing what we want to do so early on in life, and a lot of it is what our parents told us or what our teachers told us, or whoever else, and we're not like making a decision for ourselves, and then like we think, oh, we have to stick with this thing for the rest of our lives. But you know ultimately at the end of the day, like we're the ones that are living our own life, and it's important that we make decisions for ourselves. The one thing that helped me was like when I moved to Michigan. I didn't know anyone, and I was just like separate, and I was just like able to separate myself from like the culture. I knew like living in Southern California and like my mom and my family and like everything else, any other like outside influences. I was able to just like focus on myself, like what does Natasha want to do, what makes Natasha happy, like everything else. And I initially, like, to sidebar, like I thought I was gonna get disowned from my family for doing that and switching my career. But I think I forgot to say the resolution arc with like my mom and family too. Like my mom ended up being like really supportive of what I did, and I think like and that might be reassuring for people as well too, because I went against what my mom wanted me to do, and I was really I just expected she wouldn't accept it, but she did, and she's like extremely supportive, and she's like really happy for me, and was asking me about like like what I'm doing and like wanting to me to show her stuff, and like I've never experienced that with like my mom, but it's like such a good feeling to like have that like support family wise, and that's not something that I expected I would get, but ended up getting, and not everyone gets it. But hopefully that also helps other people like not be afraid to do what makes them happy, because I think hopefully like at the end of the day, like if your parents see like that you're happy and following what you want to do and you end up being successful, like they will hopefully support you. um but yeah, I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer. I think did I cover everything that you asked?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Uh, I mean, it's good to see that you don't have many regrets, because I know people as well that even if they don't admit it, you can tell that they internally they do wish they had done something else, whether that's
Mhm.
maybe studied a little harder at school and gone on to college and gone on to university, or had chosen a certain career path, was listen to certain people, because the last thing you want to do is in 30, 40, 50 years sit there and think I wasted my life. And obviously
Exactly, yeah.
obviously you got the money aspect, but ignoring the aspect, what you're doing as well. So yeah, definitely think about what you're doing, think about what you want to get out of life, and try and orientate your career, your life, who you're spending time with,
Mhm.
around those goals.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think also like the frame and mindset you have when you approach things affects it too. Like, if you like always think about like, I don't know, if you paint a picture like, oh, I failed this, I failed that, like it's such a negative mindset instead of like, I don't even like to think of things as like failure. I think failures are failures if you like give up like when you shouldn't. It's sidebar too. Like it's good to know when to quit things, but like I think like things that don't work out, like it's like a learned experience, and sometimes it opens a door for something that was it ends up being better for you too. So like yeah, I don't like to think of things like in a negative way. And I think that's kind of helped paint me like, I don't know, paint things differently for me as a person as well. Like, like I like challenges. Like I think they're, when something's challenging, like I think it's exciting and that sort of thing. But I think like as humans too, we tend to fixate on like negative a lot. But if you just point it like it's a learning experience, like next time, like I know how to do it better or whatever else, like I know how to make a better decision, it makes a difference. And also like me as a person too, like I've been described as like an opportunist. Like I always look out for like opportunities, and it's true. Like like even if like I'm not, for example, like if I'm not necessarily looking for a job, like I'm still like just like looking like like a job posting, just because I like want to know like like what are studios looking for, like what are VFX artists at other studios doing, or like looking at salaries, or just looking at opportunities, like even this, like this opportunity to be on a podcast, like UC Berkeley reached out to me to do a guest lecture, like these sorts of things. Like always looking out for things that will like kind of help and benefit or help you grow is like really important, I think. Yeah, and just try to like have like a positive frame, or positive mindset, and not like toxic positivity, but like just try to frame things in a different way. Like I think it's kind of unfair too to like look at our past sometimes, and our past decisions from a negative light, because the decisions we made back then were the decisions we made, and maybe it was the best option at the time, and like we can't look at things hindsight is 2020. We can't look at things like the way we did back then because we were different or different mindset. We just kind of like learn and grow from it. So yeah, that's that's my thoughts on it.
Oh yeah, for sure. You gotta, move forward. You gotta be willing to try different things. I
Hmm.
know a lot of people are afraid to say yes or ask a particular question. Like you were saying, me asking you to be on to on the podcast, and obviously, from your perspective, obviously it's something new for you. It's different to because it's not like you're a podcaster. You're a
Right.
VFX artist, and coming on the there was no like remuneration. I didn't pay you to come onto the podcast or anything
Hmm.
like that. So it's something that you think, okay, it'll be a new experience. You learn a lot, you end up networking. And then from my perspective, I first reached out to you. I don't know if you remember, it was back in November last year, and it's 26th of April as of recording this episode, and this episode will be going live on the 27th. Usually I don't have episodes go live within a day or two, just because I have like a backlog, but because the Jedi Survivor's coming out, I'm pushing this one up in the schedule. But like that right there is 5 months of me and you going back and forth. You were busy at the time, obviously Jedi Survivor coming out, and it's all hands on deck kind of thing.
Yes.
And but again, it's that thing of I just stayed in touch. I didn't, because initially if I had just thought, oh, she's busy right now, not interested, you know she'll never come onto the podcast, I would never have you on the podcast right now.
Yeah.
But
It's a
again,
good point.
just knowing when to step back, but then also knowing when to put
Keep going.
your foot on the gas as well, and think, can I try this, can I achieve this. So yeah, just be willing to say yes, be willing to ask. Like another opportunity, personally for me, came up. It wasn't something that was offered to me. There's a game development jam. Like, you get a bunch of them that happens
Hmm.
throughout the year, but there's one that's happening recently right now, and they have a panel of programming experts. And I reached out to them and I was like, could I be part of the panel, not for this one because it's about to finish, I think, today anyway, so obviously not for this one. But I was like, in future events, because I run a YouTube channel, I do a bunch of programming, and I think I've got some expertise that I can lend towards it. And their responses so far via email have been very positive. They're getting the details ready for the next event, and I should hopefully be on the panel for that. But again, it's
Yeah.
seeing that and thinking, the people on the panel, recognizing some of them and looking at thinking, they're good, but I could be on the panel as well in my eyes. Just literally just emailing them, and obviously
Yeah.
that will lead to other opportunities that will be allowing me to network. And it's just stuff like that. And I like how you was talking about that people describe you as an opportunist, because that can sometimes have a negative connotation to it, as if you're trying to rip people off, or always just in it for yourself. But it doesn't mean that the other person can't benefit. You can see an opportunity, act on it, but the other person can benefit as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, like I think like it goes hand in hand too. Like if you don't ask, like you'll never know too. Like then that was like my same story with me asking, my professors if they could waive my credits and everything, and like and as a quote unquote opportunist too. Like I like looking for opportunities for other people too. Like if I see a job posting like for my friends that might look good, like I'll send it to them. Like I'll help refer people. Like and I also think that I think some people like think that like, oh, you need like money as payment to like do things, or you need like that type of compensation. But I think that like even like creating like bonds with people, or networking, or like being able to teach people, or like even if like only like a couple people like watched this and got something out of it, like that's still like something good that you're like putting out into the world. And even if I'm not directly like benefiting from it, like I just it's just a nice thing to do. And I do think like eventually stuff does come back around. Like, if you're like, doing stuff for people, like sometimes, things might end up like, paying off to help you. I don't think like you should be doing that purely because of that, but I think it just makes the world a better place and like makes life better. Like when you're willing to like kind of do things for other people as well, or to talk about experiences and that sort of thing. Like I try to be like really open about my experiences in the industry too. Like I just want like there not to be like any like real like secrets. Like because I know how I felt like getting into the industry. I'm like, oh, like I don't know like how things are like done, or like pay, or like what are how studios like. So like I try to be like very open ended about the things that I've experienced and like talk to people about. So yeah, it's just yeah, always looking for opportunities and networking, and not like being pigeonholed into thinking like you can only do things if it's directly being offered to you and you can't like reach out to people, or only doing things for money. Yeah, there's opportunities everywhere, and helping other people too pays itself off as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that it it's a numbers game, and that's what I try and explain to people is that you don't have to be that good at basketball to get a shot in the hoop if you throw it 1,000 times. Like you're bound to get one in there. As long as you can throw it,
Yep.
you're gonna get one in there. But if you throw one and you don't get it in there, you're gonna be like, oh, I have 100% failure rate. I can never do it. But you do it 1,000 times, you get it in that once. And if all you need is to get it in once to become, to let's say launch your career, get a
Mhm.
job, maybe
Get your foot in the door.
whether it's let's say making apps, and you make one app, it doesn't make any money, but if you're releasing one every month, or one every few months, and it takes that one thing to really pick off.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's like my mindset that's I've had experience like if I'm applying to jobs or something like that, like, I'm not like gonna be hung up on like, oh, like when is like I don't know, Blizzard gonna like reach out to me because I applied to them. I'm gonna like apply to like several jobs and then go about my day. I'm not gonna be like thinking about it all the time. And they reach out, that sort of thing. And I don't know. I think that's also an important mindset to have, to like not get like super fixated on like outcome too. And there was something else I wanted to say, but I forgot. I got into what you were saying and I forgot. But oh yeah, like just like some of the best like friends I've had too are just like from me like reaching out to people, just because like I have a friend, her name's like Stephanie Song, and I saw like she had a similar path as me, like she went through nursing and then switched to film animation, which is similar to games. And I was like, hey, like I reached out to her and stuff, and like like I wasn't concerned that I was gonna make a fool out of myself. Like if I was, then I maybe would have never sent the message. Like I don't like live my life thinking like, oh, like what'll happen if I like reach out or ask something. Like usually people are very like open about responding and everything, and she's become like one of like a really good friend to me. And same with a lot of people I've reached out to. So like always be willing to reach out. Like obviously, like within reason too. Like there's some people that reach out and like be like, hey, I want a job, and it's like, okay, like that's not the best way to reach out to someone or network. But yeah, just being open with life and just like being nice to people and not being afraid to ask questions or seeking out your own opportunities, I think will get you like really far in life in general.
Oh yeah, definitely. Being willing to put yourself in uncomfortable position, and just ask. And most people don't realize that worst case they'll say no. I mean,
Right.
the most likely scenario is they'll just ignore you. Like
Yeah,
they won't even say no. The they'll just ignore you. So as long as you can get over that, you're pretty golden.
exactly. Yeah, and it's like, well, what's an ignore like gonna really do like to affect your life? Like, and maybe it'll feel like bad in the moment, but like, there's no point to really get hung up on it. One thing that you could take away is like, okay, like let me like double check. Like, did I like say something that was like weird or something? And then like maybe next time not do that the next time I reach out to someone, for example. But like, you know, and sometimes people are busy too. Like there's sometimes like some friends like I don't get to respond. I think I was having a similar issue when we were going back and forth too because I was like really busy. And sometimes that just happens. But like I did appreciate that you did reach out because I did want to do the podcast, but I was like stuff was going nuts and I was like doing personal stuff at the same time. So I'm glad that you were persistent with reaching out to me and it was like an appropriate level of persistence and it didn't feel like it was like pushy or anything
Yeah,
like
not like
that.
every day or anything, because when you
Yeah.
initially, said that, I'm busy right now, what I just do, because, for the FireDEV podcast, most of my guests have been literally just me code messaging on LinkedIn, because
Oh,
there's only so many people I know, and like
yeah.
it's just been how I'm, messaged you, and because I message so many people, I'm always interacting with people. Like, I'm always getting some response from somebody.
Right.
It's so I don't get hung up on it, like you're
Exactly.
saying. I don't have time to get hung up on it
Mhm.
because I have enough responses from people that uh, uh I'm not that bothered by the other 100 that I sent out that I didn't get responses for. I'm like, I've got this person, but what I just do is, in this case, I just put in my calendar. Okay, in a month or two, I'll it'll remind me, just catch up with this person, on LinkedIn, and I'll just pop in a message. Hey, how are things? Obviously, I'll read what the previous messages were, and I'll type it relative to that. But it's like, hi, how are you? How's things at work? Have you got a bit more time? Whatever it is. And if they say no, still working on it, and then I'll just say, let's stay connected. Let's circle back in the summer or in 3 months. So that way they're kind of expecting it. And I've never had one person that says no, I don't want to circle back. Like, they all say, that's fine, even if the answer might still be no in 2 3 months. Then they're all like, worst case, he messages me and I just say no again. So and then you just put it back in your calendar. But again, one, being persistent, but two,
Mhm.
keeping track of let's say if it's with a job, for example, or if you're trying to launch a podcast, keeping track of who you reached out to, when you reached out to them in some form. Obviously, I'm using a calendar for me, because otherwise you'll either reach out to people too often or not, or forget to reach out to
Mm.
them, because it's very easy to think, I'll remember and I'll just reach out to them in a couple of months. Trust me, you're not going to remember, and you're just going to forget. So make sure you keep
Right.
track of it as well.
Absolutely. Write stuff down. That's why I have everything in my Google Calendar. Don't forget anything that I have scheduled or like when something happened. It's very helpful. But yeah, like casting a wide net for sure is can definitely be beneficial. Of course, like put thought into like what you're casting a wide net for, but like, it also applies to like getting a job in the industry, like try to apply to a lot of different jobs, like like try to make sure you're portfolio is tailored to those positions, of course. But if you just apply to like one or two jobs and then get like upset and never apply to like a job again, or months later, you're not really like setting yourself up for success. But also notice like trends too. Like if you're applying to like a lot of jobs or like reaching out to a lot of people and no one's responding to you, then maybe like look at like, hey, what are you putting out that maybe is not like making it so that people want to interview you or talk to you or that sort of thing. Like, do I need to improve my portfolio? Um, but yeah, definitely casting a wide net and like trying not to take things personally and just like being persistent when it makes sense to. And yeah, like I mean, you said too, like in our particular situation, like people in the industry are like tend to be really busy as well too. And we do like get a lot of messages on like a regular basis too. Like I think almost every day I get at least like one message from like a recruiter or sometimes people like reaching out and that's another thing too, like just like reaching out to people in the industry, like a lot of times, getting reached out to by people that aren't like are trying to get into the industry and it can be hard to respond to people sometimes. One, because of how many people are sending messages, and then also like the content of the messages. Like you can like tell like if someone is like asking a like very like a question that like they could have looked up on their own, and like they could have like basically like asking a question just to ask instead of like actually being interested in answering like or asking a like interesting question, or like I've gone times where I've got like a huge brick of text and it's like that's like really overwhelming for me to try to like dissect. Like I already have like my work life and I'm busy. I'm like I want to help people, but sometimes that's really difficult to be able to help people when they do that. So like just being like really clear and like concise about what you're saying, and also avoiding like sometimes people will say like, hey, like you work at Respawn, get me a job at Respawn. It's like I don't know who you are, like like that's not how it works. Like that's not like an appropriate way to network, of course. But I think like if you're sincere, you send like like individualized message to people and that sort of thing. Like when networking, it can help, and you do your research and you seem like like what you're talking about and that sort of thing. It definitely helps a lot. Like even like throughout this process too, I think like you've asked like really good questions throughout the podcast. Like you're obviously like well read. You play Jedi Fallen Order, like Survivor and stuff like that. So like, but there's other times where I've answered questions to people and I could tell like they didn't do any of like their own like work on the back. So it's like they want you to like they're asking a high like effort outcome from you. So yeah, that's another thing to consider too for those that like are out there like wanting to network with people in the industry. Just like um just general like advice for that networking.
Oh yeah, be willing to, put that little bit of extra effort in, like you're saying, do the research because,
Mhm.
as you've, alluded to, obviously I played Jedi Fallen Order, before I had even started the FireDEV podcast, let alone try to get, you onto the podcast. But, you know, I've done research into you, mainly, being LinkedIn. Like, you don't even need to go far. Like, the amount that
Yeah,
you can just get on, LinkedIn, for example, in this case,
absolutely.
obviously, you might need to, do different research depending on what you're trying to get, out of it. But, like, in the case of the Fire Dev podcast, I find most people that I go on there, like, I can just get the information off, LinkedIn because,
Yeah,
okay, I see you worked at, Respawn, see you did this, see you did this at Naughty Dog, based on that, you know, because I have knowledge in other areas, and that's based on research. I can ask relevant questions,
mhm.
about what you're doing because I'm not asking you what programming language you're coding in because I know you're a VFX artist. Like it wouldn't make sense. But then again, obviously whilst we was doing the podcast, you did mention that at Naughty Dog you did scripting because that's how it's done. So obviously one, you prepare, but two, you be prepared that something will come up that you may not have thought as well. So that's definitely another part of it. Try not to be so rigid because sometimes people can prepare and they don't want to go off that path because I have a list of questions that I go through with all my guests, and I have an order, but every most of the time I like the order changes because you're answering in a particular way, and I'm like, okay, in the next question isn't as relevant as the question, four questions down because it's kind of linked to what you've just already, said, and based around that, I'll reorient the questions. I'll create new questions on the fly. Certain questions I won't ask because they're either not relevant anymore or they kind of got answered in a way by one of your other answers.
Right.
So be willing to be adaptable because otherwise you'll have a fixed structure and it just won't work. Whatever you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, adaptability is key in life in general, I think. Like being able to adapt to change, and I think that's how a lot of people get frazzled as well, just like with life and in general, like people are afraid of change or having to, adapt to a different environment. But I think that like a lot of successful people like can kind of like end up like going with obviously like plan ahead, but like when things change, like it's important to plan and do your research, but also like to be open and able to adapt during changing situations. I do think planning to some extent actually can help with that adaptation though too, because if you're completely unprepared, like then you won't be able to quickly adapt to those changing situations. I usually like to say like it's better to be proactive than reactive as well. Like at least like have some sort of expectations, like oh like it might go this way, but maybe unintended than what you initially thought it would. But yeah, just like, not being like super rigid will probably make you more successful in life, because that's not how like life works too, right? Like, I don't know, going about our day-to-day life, like, where there's always so much unexpected stuff that happens, and like we can't control everything in life, but like being able to go with the flow with stuff and being able to roll with the punches, I think, is like a really important thing with life. And as a game developer too, there's times where like as a VFX artist, like we make something and it's like we made it exactly how it's supposed to be made, and it's not spawning in the game, and it's just like what the heck, like, weird stuff like that happens all the time, and we can't have a meltdown about it. Like, yeah, we might feel bad or annoyed, but it's like we gotta like figure out something else. Or like, I think part of my creative process too is like I kind of like when things go wrong sometimes, because it allows me to make a creative decision that I might not necessarily have like thought about initially. So like if I'm baking something and I'm like, oh, like I messed up something, or like I don't know, I didn't have a certain ingredient, then I can like creatively find a different way to like add something into it, or learn a different way to do something. Like, that's part of my creative process. And even at work, like, I don't expect things to go 100% like the way that I expect it to, and I don't want it to, honestly, because it leads to more interesting decisions and creative things like within what I'm making or in life in general. So the unexpected can definitely be like a good thing in life.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, because that's just that's life. It doesn't go according to plan, no matter
Yeah.
how they try and orient it. That it will, when you're studying or when you're theoretically talking about stuff, it's things come up, whether it's in
Right.
the day or whether it's on a yearly basis or whether it's just throughout life in general.
Hmm.
And life, the best life is one that you can overcome those and not get too flustered by them, not think I had these plans for today or for this year and now this has derailed them, and not take those things that have come up to heart as well, because otherwise you take it too personally, and you'll find that most things that come up really aren't specifically directed at you by
Yeah.
somebody sitting there and saying, what, I'm going to do this because I particularly hate Natasha or Farhan,
Yeah.
and I want to make their life miserable.
Exactly. Yeah. It's usually not personal. Like, stuff just happens the way it happens. But I think you can help kind of curate a life for yourself where, like, you can increase your chances of luck in life per se. Like, if you continually put yourself in situations where you can increase your luck. Like, for example, like, like I on LinkedIn a lot. Like, I make like posts like once in a while and that sort of thing, and like, I've developed like a following without necessarily having to like post a lot. But like it leads to these sorts of situations, right? Like, if I never put myself on, like I never made a LinkedIn, or I never was on LinkedIn, I would never get reached out to from LinkedIn, either from you or from Respawn, or even the UC Berkeley thing. Like, there's definitely like situations where you can kind of make the luck for yourself, and kind of control like your luck in some ways. But also just being open about like that things might not work out as planned, and like that's totally okay. And things in life usually aren't permanent either. So something bad might happen, and something good might happen next time. I think one thing that like someone older than me was talking to me about, because last year I kind of went through some difficult things. Like, I had a car accident and was having some like just like stuff that just kept happening that was kind of going bad. And they were like, oh, like, like, I noticed in life, like, people like have some bad years and then usually they have like a good year next year. Like, it like life never stays the same. There's always going to be ups and downs. And there's also this old like story. I forgot, it was like a farmer and his son. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it was like something bad would happen, and then people would be to the farmer like, oh, like, that's really like sad that that happened, like, you must feel really terrible. And he was like, oh, maybe it's bad. And then next thing, like, something good would happen as a result of the bad thing, and then like they're like, oh, like, that's really great. And then he's like, oh, maybe. And then something bad happens because of the good thing. Like, it just kept going back and forth, and he was just like, people kept trying to attribute it like things as like negative or positive or whatever, and he was just like rolling with the punches. Just like, oh, like, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's just, I don't know. It's just like life. Like, instead of getting too hung up on stuff, it's good just to understand that life like has its ups and downs, and nothing stays permanent forever.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I have heard of that story, and like, I
Mhm.
mean, I've read it in one of my books. I'm trying to think which one it was. I can't remember, but I've read it a few times before. It sounds like you read a fair few books, like motivational sort of stuff. I'm guessing.
I kind of like I see stuff like on LinkedIn and stuff like
Okay.
that, like that sort of thing. I read more so like fictional books, but I do like I'll watch videos and that sort of thing that appeal to me.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, so in terms of the questions I've got for you, Natasha, that's
Mhm.
most of them done. That's like the more specific ones around your career. I've got some more, quick fire questions. I mean, they can be as quick as you want them to be, but they're
Sure.
more fun, generic questions. So the
Okay.
first one is: would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why?
Oh, okay. You said 10 versus 10,000, was it? Sorry. Wait,
10
you're
versus a
kicking
thousand.
out. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, 10 versus 1,000. I added
yeah.
another
I mean,
zero.
even 10,000, it doesn't really matter. It's basically a small team that you know everyone's name versus a Google where you cannot physically know everyone and you don't know everything that's going on.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on like the context as well. I guess I could address it in the sense of like if I was, within the game industry, and it also depends on what my goals were for this company as well. Like if I was like trying to make a lot of money or something like that, that would definitely impact my decision. But, like as a like leader or like, someone that has been in like leadership positions, I really like knowing who I'm working with, and I invest a lot too in like the people that I work with, like even if I'm not necessarily in a leadership position, like I care about them and everything. Like I like knowing people's names, like I like knowing, kind of like if they have like kind of like what their personal life is to an extent, like if they're like really like busy or they have stuff going on or whatever. Like I like having a like face to name. So that's why I would definitely lean more towards like the ten person team for sure. And I there's definitely been situations where I have managed around that same amount of people, like in my last year of game dev school. Well, I at first I was managing a lot of people because I was managing like a lot of the interns too at Activision, just like socially. And like I remembered like everyone too, like I remember where people are from and like their their job titles and everything. And then I also had like several projects on the side where I was managing 10 to like 15 people. I had like two or three of those projects on the side, and yeah, so like I definitely see the benefits of a smaller scale team. But yeah, for a team of 1,000, I feel like in that case you would need sub leaders as well to manage the different areas, and then the people within those different departments would report to those leaders, and then you'd like talk to them. But I think perhaps like if you were in it for like maybe like making a lot of money or something like that, maybe managing a team of 1,000 would be more ideal. But I think for personal preference wise, like I like that tight knitness of knowing that team of 10.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, most people do choose the the 10-person company.
Mhm.
When I asked them on the podcast, the odd one has chosen the 1,001-person company, but most do choose the 10-person company. So, what's your favorite board game? Because I've asked video game, I've asked movie. What about board game?
That's a good question. Trying to think. I haven't played a board game in some time. I don't know if a tabletop game like Dungeons and Dragons would count.
Yeah, I mean, I would count that as a board game. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's tabletop. Yeah, and recently I started me and some friends started a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and that's been really fun. In the past, like it was a couple years ago that I've done stuff like Pathfinder, like other tabletop RPGs. But yeah, I like it's kind of like I mean, it's kind of like a video game too, right? I mean, like in the sense of like you create your own character and you get to interact with the world, and it's pretty open ended too. And I think the nice thing about that is like things happen on the fly as well. Like the dungeon master, the DM has to think of things like improv things that you might not have necessarily expected the players to do or plan out. So yeah, it can be a lot of fun, and also like just the the aspect of like growing with a team and like leveling up and defeating things or figuring out and the aspect of the like the mystical mythological like of there being like dragons or goblins or you know fairies and princesses and that sort of thing. That's always fun, right? Like even as kid, I feel like it's like as kids we used to always like imagine like we were like some other thing like a princess or whatever, and like that's like our way of as adults to be able to like live that out in like an adult format.
Okay, so what video game are you looking forward to?
Oh, like being released.
Yes, like looking forward to
Good
play.
question. Yeah, there's a lot of like good releases coming out this year. The most, well, obviously Jedi Survivor, but we can't say that. That doesn't count. Redfall is coming out on May 2nd, and I'm excited to play that with my friends. I have some friends that are also like Arcane, like Goonies or like Arcane fans, so we're really excited to get the squad up and going on that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Arcane, so I'm trying to think what other games are being released this year. I've been like so like on the Jedi Survivor, like getting that shipped mode that I haven't thought about a lot of other games this year. Um, hmm. Yeah, that's like the one game I can think of. Oh, Starfield is coming out as well. Um, that I'm also looking forward to. I believe Bethesda. Um, yeah, it's Bethesda. Yeah, the action RPG game. I think it's open world as well. So, and it looks like you can play it with friends. So, yeah, definitely looking forward to that as well.
Oh, yeah, like Starfield. I know a lot of people have been, waiting, for that
Yes.
particular game. You've got Zelda coming out this week
Oh,
as well
yes.
for all the hardcore Zelda
Crazy.
fans out there. Jedi Survivor coming out in a couple of days. I'm trying to think what else is coming out. Hopefully, The Last of Us Part Two multiplayer. If you want to give us a launch, really. Yeah, but I mean, hopefully that comes out. Obviously, we still got E3 coming. Hopefully,
Mhm.
we get an announcement of GTA 6 as well,
Yeah,
something along those lines. We got the next Call of Duty, which is inevitably to come out November this year as well.
absolutely.
So, I mean, trying to think,
It's a
are they
big year.
releasing an Assassin's Creed this year?
I didn't see that. Let me
Because I
see.
know they
Oh,
are.
wait, Mirage. Wait, to be
Yes,
announced.
yeah, because they're taking it
Okay.
back to its roots a bit. I'm excited for that. My wife's excited for that
Yes.
as well.
I do
So I'm
like Assassin's
hoping
Creed.
that feels good compared to the
Yes.
more recent Assassin's Creed games.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really liked Odyssey a lot.
That was good. I enjoyed
Valhalla
that.
I couldn't get into as much. I wasn't
Yeah,
as invested in it. It was hard for me to get into it.
it just didn't
Um,
feel good. Like when I was
yeah.
playing it, because I had just come off playing Ghost of Tsushima, and
Oh,
after playing that, I was like, I really enjoyed an open world game.
yep.
Because I ended up platinum in that game on PlayStation,
Oh,
so I spent a lot of hours playing that game, and I was like, I wouldn't mind another open world game. Sinking tens of hours into it, exploring everything. And I was like, Assassin's Creed. It's not long since it's come out. I'm happy I didn't spend money, and my cousin had it. He lent it me. I mean, he disliked it so much he didn't even ask for it back.
oh my gosh! Wow.
So I've still got his copy on my shelf because I remember when I said to him, "Yeah, you need to get your your Valhalla copy back." He's just like, "I'm not fussed." He's just like,
Oh
"I'm
my
not
gosh.
fussed about that game." So
It's
yeah,
so funny.
I tried that, sunk about probably a few hours into it, 3 4 hours, and I was like, I can't see myself playing this for, because I googled it, how long the single player campaign was, and I think it was like twice the length of Ghost of Tsushima, which was long
Oh,
already. And I was like,
yeah.
no way am I wasting my time on a game like this. Ghost of Tsushima, have you played it?
I played a good amount of it until I inevitably got distracted with something else. But
Yeah,
I did really enjoy it. I need to
yeah.
restart it if I want to play it again because it's been too long. But
Oh yeah, like
that's great.
the like that is, it's one of those games that when you play, you just feel like this is like a living piece of art. Like the way the wind would interact with
Yes.
the fields of
Yeah.
flowers. The colors, the contrast. Not only did it look good, in terms of looking realistic, but it had a certain feel to it that a game like God of War, which has its own sense of realism, doesn't quite have like there's a certain artistry to it that
Mhm.
Ghost of Tsushima is almost like just watch. Say sometimes when I would be on the horse and I would be going from one place to another place and I would just be running through the fields, it just felt like I was watching a moving piece of art.
Yeah. Yeah. Games like that for sure, just the level of detail. It's just like a piece of art that has so much thought and love put into it, and I guess that's kind of I guess it lends itself a little bit to like the more I guess stylized approach as well, because it's not so hard rooted in just pure realism. It can kind of go a little bit beyond that to where like when I played it, like I like when I can like feel things from the game or like feel like the VFX too. Like I felt like I could feel the winds like in my room when I was using like or when there was wind in the game, or like when I saw like the wind animation and everything. Like so yeah, that's how much I feel like those like games like that can like really speak to players. And it's in like it's kind of in a league of its own too, because I don't know if there's a game that's like exactly like that. So yeah, they definitely made it their own.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like what they was able to do with it is on another level. Just trying to
Absolutely.
think, what other games are coming out. Mm, I mean, I know there's plenty of them. I just can't think, to hand. But yeah, Ghost was fantastic. Because I think they're doing a movie or a TV show on Ghost as well.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear about that. I wonder
So
what
obviously, it
streaming
seems to
service.
be the in thing doing
Yeah,
the TV shows. And actually, did you watch the Last of Us TV show?
I did.
What
Yes.
did you think?
I really liked the show, and I think it's kind of grew more my appreciation for The Last of Us in general. I think that the changes that they made were smart, for the medium that is the show, and it also was different enough to where it was interesting to watch the show, like even if you knew what like the game was about. It added a lot of like depth and backstory to a lot of characters and lore in general, and yeah, and even if I knew what was like gonna like probably happen, like I still felt like sad, or I felt things strongly. So, and I think the acting was very on point. Um, so yeah, I think they overall did a good job with it. I think it's kind of become like one of my more like comfort shows too. I think I love how they kind of we saw the softer side of Joel too. Like I think that was like one of my favorite episodes, like was just like seeing him like having anxiety and panic attacks and stuff like that, and also helps normalize that for other people to see, and also like that you don't always need to be like tough all the time too. Yeah, so that character development was really great to see.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like the TV show, I really like the video games. I really love, but I enjoyed the TV show as well. Yeah, there were a few changes, but overall, you knew what was gonna happen. What I really liked was that they didn't drag it out. It was one
Mhm.
season, one game. They could have easily have dragged this out to 3, 4 seasons just for the one game, and because you would get a character introduced in an episode, then by the end of the episode or episode later, they would be dead. Because in the
Mhm.
game, you would have a character introduced, and then like 2 hours later, that character would be gone.
Yeah.
So like to have that and keep that consistent was definitely something I appreciated coming from the video games. But again, like you said, the backstory they added for some of the characters, like Henry and Bill, to add a bit more life to some of those characters, which were good, but you didn't see much of. And because they clearly, based on the dialogue and what they was doing in the game, you, they clearly had a life before, like something that
Right.
was, they had some story arc, pre all of what was happening in the video game when you see them, but you
Mhm.
don't see that, and you got to see it, in the the TV show part of it. What I'm hoping is because Joel with his anxiety attacks and him trying to cope with that. One thing that went through my mind whilst watching it was that I hope they don't try and rewrite The Last of Us Part 2 when they do it in the TV show, and they try and kill him off in a different way instead of
Mm.
it being with, obviously, spoilers for anyone that hasn't played part two, but instead of Abby killing him. I mean, I was glad at the end when he still did kill the doctor, and he saved Ellie. So that is still concretely rooted in the Last of Us story and how the video game panned out. But I'm just hoping they keep that over what happened in part two for the TV show, and they don't try and rewrite in some other capacity.
Yeah, I saw I watched all or listened to all the podcasts with like Neil and the writer for the show. His name escapes me. But and I heard Neil said he wants to keep it like as close to like what the game was. Obviously, like there'll be like other variant things, like just same with the part one. But I think they're probably gonna stick to the script of what was at the core of part two. So I think we probably expect like Joel's probably gonna die the same way, which would make some people mad, but it is what it is. But yeah, one thing too that I love about the show too is like even like people that don't like games can really invest in the show and the characters, and a lot of it's like touched a lot of people too, like people that I know like that didn't even know if it was a game or even played it, like my mom, like, and my stepdad can enjoy the game, like even my mom was like, she like looked up, I guess she looked up spoilers, and she like figured out that Joel was supposed to die in the second game. She's like, I hope they don't like kill him or kill him off bad or something like that. Like it's cool to see like the accessibility that like we've been able to like give to like people like that don't normally play games to be able to appreciate the story of The Last of Us, and also hopefully like people will like understand too that like like I think people have like a sometimes a childish view of games as well, but I think like this can help them understand like games aren't just like little like I don't know, just like shooters. It's like there's a lot of other stuff that games can have a lot of depth. Like they can have a lot of they can tell meaningful stories, and it's been cool like seeing all over the world that people have really loved The Last of Us. And yeah, my mom and stepdad traveled overseas, and she said even people in like Malaysia and Asia, like they're talking about The Last of Us, and they have like posters of it everywhere, and it's just cool to see the impact of it. But yeah, they did a really great job with the depth of characters, and yeah, and again, like we were saying, I think that they'll probably stick to the general original script of part two, but hopefully not expand on things. It sounds like they're splitting um that part two into two different seasons, so maybe like this is just like a fan guess or whatever. Maybe like they'll show the time period before leading up to two. Like maybe we'll see more of like Joel and Ellie or something, or maybe we'll see more like backstory between them or interactions with them before they they have Pedro Pascal leave us, because I'm sure we all want to see him more. So
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not a bad way to do season two, or part two in season two and three and four. I mean, season two and three, because I'm pretty sure part two was longer than part one as a video
mhm.
game. You know,
Yep.
anyway, so there's that aspect of it, plus because they was doing the flashbacks in part two with Ellie and Joel, and obviously we had a bit of that in the game, but expanding that out in the TV show, and like you were saying, as a way of giving airtime to Joel, because otherwise Joel's gone pretty early in the game,
Yeah.
in part two, and you have a bit of flashbacks, but for most of the game he's not in there. So
Right.
you like potentially having a whole season, and then maybe ending season two at at his death, and maybe Ellie sitting there in the cabin back at the camp, game plotting her revenge, and like that could be a way of ending season two, and then season three is the whole revenge arc of her going, and then trying to get Abby and the rest of her crew as well.
Absolutely, yeah, I can definitely see it playing out that way. Yeah, I mean, I want to see more of Pedro Pascal, so hopefully we get a little bit more of him than we did in than we did in the game with Joel dying off so quickly.
Oh yeah. So I mean, talking about Pedro, have you watched Mandalorian? Do you watch that?
I've watched a bit of it. I haven't watched like a ton of it, but yeah, I know a lot of people that really like it.
So would you rather have 5 million up front, US dollars up front, or 500,000 a year for the rest of your life? And what's the reasoning behind, your decision?
That's a good question. I've always actually said that if I won the lottery, I would still be doing what I do. Like, I don't know. I obviously like I do care about money and everything like that, but I've never been like one that like, oh, like I want to win like a ton of money or anything like that. Because I really love what I do, and I don't think any amount of money would like necessarily change like my life or like or I mean like if I got a huge lump sum of money like I wouldn't change like what I do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I mean with that in mind it's kind of hard for me to like answer that question cuz like I wouldn't even mind like either option and just donating like oh like that money to be honest. Um but yeah, I don't know. I guess I mean the thought of having like an expected amount of income, like yearly, or like a steady flow of like money coming in is appealing, I suppose. I guess with the lump sum at once, you could invest it, and then it could expand quickly. Um, so I guess maybe like the lump sum option potentially, but I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm not like like I care about money in terms of like making money in my own industry, but like I'm not super money like driven in that aspect. So it's just like I guess it's difficult for me to like to say, I suppose. I mean, either option sound like they would be fine, and I would work with it. Um, yeah.
So does money buy you happiness? Obviously, going off the previous question, and what does a good life ultimately mean to you?
Yeah, so I think like so money for sure is necessary for like getting your basic needs met and then some as well, of course. Um and and speaking from my experiences as a nurse too, like um we basically considered like poverty as basically a health like condition because impoverished people like they have like health problems because they don't like get preventative care like going to the dentist getting healthcare on a regular basis and that sort of thing like it eh, being a lower socioeconomic status has a major impact on your health because you're not able to get the resources you need and then also impacts your stress levels because you're always like worried about money. And I've definitely been in situations where like I was concerned like with paying my bills or like getting food or like paying my rent. I was running into that problem when I was in Michigan and I was working and going to school and I was like really afraid about sometimes about not being able to make my rent. Um, and I experienced a little bit of that too when I moved to Santa Monica. And, I got in a car accident and I had so many like bills and stuff that I was like dealing with. And yeah, worrying about money definitely affects your quality of life and stress and everything. Um, but I guess I've always been one that like like will advocate for like my salary and also like I work extra if I need to, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it is important. I don't think it's everything, but I think that money will help with like basic needs and also like if there's things that you want to do like in like like going to Disneyland that costs money, going on trips overseas, or doing things you want to do, like to not be restricted by money. It can be like a powerful thing for sure. I think I'm pretty fortunate right now to where like I do have a good income and like I live in a nice place. So like right now like money like hasn't been like a huge concern of me right now, but I think in general like it would be unfair to say like, oh, like like money doesn't matter at all. But again, I'm not someone that is like superficial in the sense that like, oh, I need to be like super rich or something like that. But yeah, I think I think there was another question to what you asked too about like money, about happiness, and then there was something else that I'm missing.
Like, what does a good life mean to you?
Oh, a good life. Yeah, I mean, okay, well, since we're talking about money, like financial stability, important for sure. Um, my life kind of revolves around like I'm very passionate about my career. Like say my life kind of revolves around games and like VFX and like me being an artist and that sort of thing. So I think like, being successful in my career, but I don't think it's everything. I think like having a good support system and having really good relationships with people around you makes your life a lot better too. So like while I am very career oriented, I think it's really important to have the balance of spending time with friends and family. And like I always think about like my dad passed away when I was really young too, so it also helped give some perspective. Like if you're like if you die tomorrow and you're on your deathbed, like would you be happy with like the life that you lived? Like are you going to be like worried about like, oh, like I'm so glad like I made so much money, or are you going to be like, oh, like I'm so glad I have so many people around me that like love me and care about me and that sort of thing. Like I lived a good life with a lot of good memories and stuff like that. So yeah, that like having the balance of um, being successful in my career and also having like a great group of people around me that I can rely on and like I love and they love me is really important. And eventually, maybe having like a family of own would also be great. But people matter to me a lot. I think in general, like I taking care of my people and like people taking care of me. Like I'm all about that tribe mentality. So while like yes, like I do work like hard at work, like I like having like time to spend with my loved ones and everything, and that's what makes me happy as well, is that time spent with people.
Yeah, I think that's applicable for most people. To be fair, obviously having a successful career, having something that you can work towards, that you enjoy, but then having that other balance as well, because I know we do live in a culture, especially with social media, to my grind, 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 work, work,
Yep,
work, and make this money, do that. And I think all those things are important. You got to look after yourself, and when you have a family and you have people depending on you, you've got to look after them, and you don't want them to suffer, but not at the cost of, at least definitely not always at the cost, maybe sometimes, but not always, where yeah, you have all the money that you can get for your kids, but then you spend no time with your kids. You
exactly.
are unable to take them out, enjoy life with them. I know that's something that I've worked on, after getting married, after having a daughter as well, is spending more time with my wife, because pre getting married, it was work, 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 and that was it. And I remember after getting married, that was something that I found a bit difficult, was being able to shut work off. And I know something that, from my wife's perspective, she's worked on, understanding that work's going to be a big part of my life. I'm doing so many different things. I enjoy trying to do new and different things, and will be out, and I'll put my phone away, or I won't work. But she knows that I may say, I just need to quickly send an email, but again, I won't have my phone out for the whole 2 hours that we're out, just checking this or sending this. And it's a matter of more urgency, or if something comes to mind, and she's okay with that, and then I'm also okay with it as well. And then sometimes I fit it in, like if we're at a restaurant and she's gone to the toilet, I'm like, I might do a bit of work then, or I've gone to the toilet and I'm there for 2 minutes, I'll do a bit of work then. But other than that, if we're sitting there, like I said, at a restaurant, both of us trying to be more present. And that's obviously now the case, obviously now that we've got a kid, trying to be more present when I'm with my daughter as well, because I don't spend as much time as I would like to with her, just for the simple fact, I am working, I am doing other stuff for the family around the
Right.
house. But when I do sit with her, I try and make sure I don't use my phone. And I say I'd
That's good.
rather have 5 or 10 minutes less with her, but the quality of the interaction be better. And even if I'm sitting there and she's playing on her own and I'm not playing with her because she's just happier playing with on her own in that moment, I still rather not be on my phone and just watch her and her know that I'm there, but I'm concentrating on her and not on my phone, because
Right.
I can go on my phone, like I said, I can leave the room 5 minutes early and then just do what I need to do, if I want to. So like being present in that way is something that has become more important to me as well, and being more spontaneous, and thinking, okay, what, because I used to be save, 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 I want to save as much money as I can, and I'm still in that mindset, but understanding that got to enjoy life, now, whilst we're, going through life.
Yeah, in the moment for sure. Yeah, and I experienced that too, the other side of it, because growing up, single mom, and my mom was working a lot. Like I didn't see her that much, and when we would see each other, we'd end up like arguing, as like kid, a teenager, and it is hard to like experience that, like a parent that's always working, and I never like want like my kids to feel that way, or also like my friends to feel like I don't have time for them because I'm working, or whatever else. Like I want to strike that balance for sure, and I understand how like it can be like hurtful to feel that way, to not have that like one-on-one time. And I've also seen a lot of people that like they are very money focused, so they work a lot, but it's like they don't even have time to like spend the money because they're working so much. And work causes stress, and stress takes a toll on our health. Like it raises our cortisol levels, and sustained cortisol levels over time like shrinks the telomeres in our DNA. The telomeres are like how the longer the telomere, the more so our telomeres, like every time our like DNA replicates, or our cells replicate, the telomeres shrink. So like as it gets, as you grow older, it shrinks more and more. But cortisol, like high stress levels, like they shrink that faster than it's supposed to. So we literally like kill ourselves faster by being so stressed out. So that's another aspect too. It's like, yeah, like we work a lot, we make a lot of money, but it's like we're also killing ourselves faster, and we can't even spend that money, right? Like we're so stressed, or we take it out on our partners or our family. And yeah, so it's just important to have that balance. And I even remind my friends in the industry, because we're so like career focused. I'm like, okay, like when you go outside, touch some grass, like let's go on a hike, like sleep, please sleep, like please take care of yourself. Like we only have one body and one life to live. And yeah, I just wouldn't want to have regrets in that way of like neglecting the people in my life because of work, the rat race that is working like in US, or in game dev in general. Um, yeah,
Oh yeah, like definitely. You want to minimize many regrets as possible.
of course.
Experience different things, like you say, go out, look after yourself, look after your body, but just also enjoy the things that are outside, the nature. That's something I know I've grown to appreciate more, that I am, like I said, getting older, married, have a kid now. Like if I was 20 years old still at uni, I was more fussed to just stay inside, and like all throughout my pretty much my whole 4 years at uni, my curtains or my blinds were closed, because I preferred to just have them closed and just have the actual light on. And though I
Oh
still
wow.
do that a lot now at home, there'll be times where I'll be like, what, I feel like getting some natural light in. I'll open the
Yeah.
blinds, I'll go on a walk. So I can definitely see the change in me wanting to, enjoy that a bit more, and slow down in a way where you can appreciate things, instead of having
Mhm.
everything, just go by you, and you just not enjoy stuff anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely important. I mean, like me having a dog helps force me to go outside too. And speaking as an artist or like game developer, like anyone that creates anything, like we need to absorb outside things in order for us to even do our jobs. Like, right? Like, I mean, if I'm an artist, like I need to go outside, like actually look at water, actually look at leaves in the wind, that sort of thing. Like it helps inform my work, and it also helps me like as a human being. So I mean, I always encourage people to like go out and do things, and like especially if they're having like an art block or something like that, like go like live life, and like stuff will come to you, like experience life, and like if you're stuck on something at work, work, like usually like things will like your subconscious will kind of work itself out for you. And I like going on walks too, like if I'm like struggling with figuring something out at work or something like that, like just getting fresh air, like getting the blood flowing and everything. Like it's important, it's helpful, and like yeah, it's part of being human and alive. So we definitely need to do it.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that's all the questions that I've got for our podcast. I want to thank you, Natasha, for coming on today. Talking about your journey, your time at Respawn, working on Jedi Survivor. Last of Us Part One, and all the other things that you've done, and your transition from nursing to the gaming industry. Is there anything you want to say before we close up?
Yeah, I mean, this was a really great opportunity. I had a lot of fun doing this, and yeah, thanks for your time. I'm glad I was able to share things about like I guess it's very like event appropriate with the Last of Us show coming out and Survivor coming out. So I'm really glad to be able to share that, and hopefully the things I've said is helpful or inspiring to people. And yeah, and I'll keep posting my work on LinkedIn or ArtStation if people want to look at it or reach out. My DMs are open. But
Yeah,
thank you for your
so
time.
yeah, no problem. I enjoyed having you on the podcast. Obviously, Jedi Survivor coming out in a very soon. Obviously, this episode will be airing on the 27th of April, and Jedi Survivor in the UK at least is coming out tomorrow. Well, I can't wait to get hold of that, play that. I'll get all the links off you, Natasha, if you just send them to me on LinkedIn, and I'll
Absolutely.
put them in the description that you want to share. And obviously, thank you for tuning into this episode of FireDEV. Stay tuned for the next episode and go and check out Jedi Survivor. And I'll see you soon. Bye bye.